In the shadow of a Philadelphia mansion where silence had become a prison, a billionaire CEO was about to discover that the person who could save her daughter wouldn't arrive in a limousine. He'd come with a garbage truck. When 6-year-old Elsie Sterling spoke her first words in 3 years, they wouldn't be to the army of specialists her mother had hired. They'd be to a sanitation worker who understood something Vivian Sterling had forgotten: that broken things don't need fixing, they need love. This is a story about two fathers, two children, and the moment when wealth learned to kneel before wisdom. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The nightmare always started the same way. Vivian Sterling would be standing in her daughter's bedroom, not the actual bedroom with its imported French furniture and educational posters arranged by a child psychologist, but a dream version where everything was white and endless. And Elsie would be there, her small 6-year-old body turned away, shoulders shaking with sobs Vivian could see but not hear. Vivian would try to reach for her, but her arms wouldn't move. She'd try to call out, but her voice would crack and fail. And then Elsie would turn around, tears streaming down her face, and open her mouth to speak. "Mommy." That single word, the word Vivian hadn't heard in 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, would shatter the dream like glass. Vivian woke gasping in her king-sized bed, the Philadelphia dawn bleeding gray light through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Society Hill's cobblestone streets. Her silk sheets were twisted around her legs. Her heart hammered against her ribs like something trying to escape. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, couldn't remember anything except that voice, Elsie's voice, saying the one word that had died the day they buried Elsie's father. She pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. "Get it together, Vivian." Her phone was already lighting up on the nightstand. 5:47 a.m. Emails from Hong Kong about the Singapore merger, a reminder about the board meeting at 8, a text from Dr. Harrison about Elsie's appointment on Thursday. The world didn't stop because you had nightmares. The world didn't care. Vivian threw off the sheets and stood, her bare feet silent on imported Italian tile as she moved through the master suite that occupied the entire third floor of the Sterling mansion. Everything in this house was carefully chosen, meticulously designed. The mansion itself was a restored 1880s brownstone that had cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. 4 stories of history and elegance on a tree-lined street where old money whispered behind iron gates and manicured hedges. She'd bought it for Elsie, for the childhood Vivian had promised her daughter would be different from her own sterile upbringing, for the family they were supposed to be, before Richard died, before everything went silent. Vivian pulled on her running clothes with mechanical precision, Lululemon leggings, a moisture-wicking top, shoes that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Running was her meditation, her therapy, the only time her brain could quiet the constant calculations of quarterly earnings and market share and stockholder confidence. She needed it more than ever lately, with the Singapore deal hanging by a thread and the board questioning every decision she made. She paused outside Elsie's door on the second floor. No sound came from within. There never was. For a moment, Vivian's hand hovered over the handle. She could go in, could sit on the edge of Elsie's bed like she used to when Elsie was 3, when they'd read stories together, and Elsie would laugh at all the funny voices Vivian made. When had she stopped making funny voices? When had bedtime become another appointment to optimize, another problem to solve? The memory of the dream, "Mommy," echoed in her skull. Vivian's hand dropped. She turned away and headed down the grand staircase past the photos she'd had professionally taken after Richard died. Sterling family portraits in heavy frames, arranged by an interior designer to create visual warmth. Vivian hated every single one. They were beautiful and perfect and completely empty, like everything else in this house. Like her. She let herself out the front door into the October morning. The air was sharp with autumn, carrying the smell of old leaves and distant coffee. Society Hill was just waking up, lights flickering on in historic windows, the distant rumble of traffic from South Street. This neighborhood was a preserve of old Philadelphia wealth, where cobblestones gleamed and iron gates stood like sentinels, and nobody asked how much anything cost, because if you had to ask, you didn't belong. Vivian started running north on 3rd Street, her breath fogging in the cold air, her mind already shifting into the day's agenda. The Singapore merger, the board meeting, Dr. Harrison's latest report on Elsie's progress, or lack thereof. 3 years of specialists, 3 years of therapists and behavioral analysts and speech pathologists and occupational experts. 3 years of watching strangers poke and prod her daughter like she was a puzzle to solve. 3 years of failure, because Elsie still didn't speak. Elsie still woke up screaming from nightmares she couldn't describe. Elsie still flinched when Vivian touched her, still retreated into silence like it was the only safe place left in the world. And Vivian, brilliant, driven, capable Vivian Sterling, who'd built a tech empire from nothing, who'd earned her MBA at 23 and her first billion at 30, couldn't fix her own daughter. Her pace increased until her legs burned and her lungs ached, until the thoughts couldn't keep up, until there was nothing but breath and motion and the slap of expensive shoes on historic stone. She didn't see the garbage truck until she nearly ran into it. "Whoa!" A man's voice, surprised but not angry. "Sorry about that, miss. Didn't mean to block your route." Vivian stumbled to a halt, her chest heaving. The Department of Sanitation truck was parked at the corner of 3rd and Locust, its bulk taking up half the narrow street. A man stood beside it, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40, wearing the dark green uniform of city sanitation workers. He had kind eyes, the sort of weathered face that suggested he smiled often, and hands that looked like they knew real work. "You should watch where you park," Vivian snapped, the words coming out sharper than she intended. She was breathing hard, sweat cooling on her skin, and she didn't have time for this. The board meeting was in 2 hours, and she still needed to shower and review the merger documents and, "You're right," the man said easily, no defensiveness in his tone. "I'll move it. Just give me 2 minutes to finish this pickup." Something about his calm response made Vivian feel suddenly, absurdly ashamed of her tone. She watched as he hefted a bag of garbage into the truck's compactor with practiced efficiency, his movements smooth and unhurried despite the fact that she was clearly waiting. There was something almost meditative about the way he worked, like he'd done this 10,000 times and found a rhythm in it. When he was done, he turned back to her with an apologetic smile. "All yours. And hey, great morning for a run, huh? Perfect temperature." Vivian found herself nodding, though she hadn't actually noticed the temperature until he mentioned it. "Yes, it is." She started past him, then paused. Some instinct she didn't quite understand made her look back. The sanitation worker was climbing back into his truck, humming something under his breath. There was an ease to him, a contentment that seemed completely at odds with the nature of his work. How could someone who collected garbage for a living seem so peaceful? "Thank you," Vivian heard herself say. "For moving." He looked surprised, then pleased. "No problem at all. You have a good run now." The truck rumbled away down Locust Street and Vivian resumed her pace. But for the rest of her run, she couldn't quite shake the image of that man's smile. Like he had something she'd lost. Something no amount of money could buy back. By the time she returned to the mansion, her housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had already arrived and was preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee and toast filled the massive kitchen, all granite counters and professional appliances that rarely got used because neither Vivian nor Elsie actually cooked. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," Mrs. Chen said, her tone professionally pleasant. "Elsie is awake. She's in her room." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." Vivian poured herself coffee from the French press, checking her watch. 7:15. The board meeting was at 8. She had 45 minutes to shower, dress, review documents, and what? Say good morning to her daughter? Try again to coax words out of silence? Fail again to be the mother Elsie needed? Vivian climbed the stairs with her coffee, her running clothes clinging to her skin. She knocked softly on Elsie's door, then pushed it open. Elsie sat on the floor near her window, surrounded by stuffed animals arranged in precise rows. She was still in her pajamas, soft cotton covered in stars that Vivian's assistant had ordered online. Her dark hair was sleep-tangled, falling over eyes that were gray like Richard's, gray like storm clouds over water. She didn't look up when Vivian entered. "Good morning, sweetheart," Vivian said, keeping her voice gentle, modulated. Dr. Harrison had coached her extensively on tone, calm, consistent, non-demanding. Did you sleep well? Elsie's fingers traced patterns on the carpet. No response. Vivian sat down on the edge of Elsie's bed, careful not to disturb the stuffed animal arrangement. I have a meeting this morning, but Mrs. Chen will be here. And you have school, remember? Miss Patricia will pick you up at 8:30. Elsie went to a private academy that specialized in children with selective mutism, Dr. Harrison's diagnosis, though it felt inadequate to Vivian. Selective implied choice, and what 6-year-old would choose silence? What child would choose to lock herself away from the world like this? Unless the world had given her reasons. Unless grief had taught her that words were dangerous things that could be ripped away without warning. Vivian's chest tightened. She stood, setting her coffee cup on the dresser. I'll check on you tonight, okay? Maybe we can read together before bed. Would you like that? For just a moment, Elsie's fingers paused in their tracing, but she didn't look up, didn't nod, didn't give any sign that she'd heard. And after 3 years, Vivian had learned not to push. Pushing only made Elsie retreat further into herself, made her small body curl up like something trying to disappear. Okay, Vivian whispered. I love you, Elsie. She left before the silence could swallow her whole. 40 minutes later, Vivian was in her car, a Tesla Model S that drove itself while she reviewed documents on her tablet, heading downtown to Sterling Technologies headquarters. The building was all glass and steel in University City, a monument to innovation and progress that bore her name in letters 10 feet high. The board meeting was exactly as excruciating as she'd anticipated. 8 men in expensive suits questioning her decisions, her timeline, her leadership style on the Singapore merger. Never mind that she'd built this company from a startup in her garage to a tech firm worth $3 billion. Never mind that her vision had made them all rich. The moment you showed weakness, the moment you faltered, they circled like sharks. And lately, Vivian had been faltering. The problem, Vivian, said Thomas Brennan, the board's lead investor and her most vocal critic, is optics. Your personal life is affecting stockholder confidence. Vivian's fingers tightened on her pen. My personal life has nothing to do with this company's performance. Doesn't it? Brennan leaned back in his chair, his expression all false sympathy. You've missed 3 major investor dinners this quarter. You left the Tokyo presentation early. There are rumors. Vivian's voice could have cut glass. That you're distracted. That the situation with your daughter is affecting your focus. Now, we're all sympathetic, of course. Don't. The word came out harder than Vivian intended. She forced herself to take a breath, to remember Dr. Harrison's coaching about emotional regulation. Don't pretend this is about sympathy. This is about control. You want me to choose between my company and my child. The silence around the conference table was deafening. No one's asking you to choose, Brennan said smoothly. We're simply suggesting that perhaps some delegation might be in order. Stephen could handle the Singapore negotiations. You could take some time, focus on, I built this company, Vivian said quietly, dangerously. Every line of code in our first product was mine. Every investor meeting, every pitch, every all-nighter, mine. And now you want to suggest I step aside because I have a daughter who needs me? We're suggesting, said another board member, Marcus Wu, more gently, that you're carrying a lot. That maybe accepting help isn't weakness. Vivian looked around the table at these men who'd never had to choose, who had wives at home handling the messy parts of life while they focused on conquest and profit. Rage and exhaustion warred in her chest. The Singapore merger closes in 30 days, she said flatly. I'll handle it. Is there anything else? The meeting limped to its conclusion. Vivian made it back to her office before the mask cracked, before she had to sit down at her desk and put her head in her hands and admit that maybe, just maybe, they were right. Maybe she was failing at everything. The company, her daughter, her life. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. Elsie had good day at school. Miss Patricia says she participated in art class. Participated. Not spoke, not engaged, not laughed. Participated. As if Elsie's life could be measured in these tiny, inadequate victories. Vivian stayed at the office until well past dark, until the cleaning crew arrived and gave her sympathetic looks as they emptied trash cans around her. She drove home through empty streets, the Tesla's autopilot navigating while she stared out at the city lights, and tried to remember when her life had become this, a series of failures dressed up in expensive clothes. The mansion was dark when she arrived, except for the second-floor lights. Mrs. Chen had left dinner in the refrigerator with reheating instructions Vivian wouldn't follow. She climbed the stairs to Elsie's room, each step heavier than the last. Elsie was already asleep, her small body curled around a battered teddy bear that had been Richard's gift to her 3rd birthday. Mr. Buttons, Elsie used to call it, back when she called things by names, back when she spoke. Vivian stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Elsie looked peaceful, almost happy. Like maybe in her dreams she could still talk to her father, could still be the bright, laughing little girl who'd once made Vivian's whole world make sense. "I'm sorry," Vivian whispered to the sleeping child. "I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to be what you need." Elsie didn't stir. The confession dissolved into darkness, unanswered. Vivian retreated to her own bedroom, took 2 sleeping pills, and prayed that tonight the nightmare would leave her alone. It didn't. Miles Carter woke up at 4:30 a.m. to his son's alarm blaring through the thin walls of their 2-bedroom apartment in Kensington. He smiled before he even opened his eyes, because that alarm meant Noah had actually remembered to set it, which meant Noah was taking responsibility, which meant Miles was doing something right as a father. "I'm up," Noah's voice called from the other bedroom, groggy but determined. "I'm getting ready." "Good man," Miles called back. He sat up in bed, his back protesting slightly. 40 years of lifting garbage bags would do that to you, and stretched until his spine cracked. The apartment was cold. October mornings snuck through the old windows, no matter how much weather stripping he applied. But it was theirs, paid for with honest work, and that mattered more than comfort. Miles had learned a long time ago that happiness wasn't about the size of your house. It was about what you filled it with. He pulled on sweatpants and padded out to the kitchen, flicking on the overhead light. The apartment was small, living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms barely big enough for beds, but Miles had made it warm. Noah's drawings covered the refrigerator. Plants lined the windowsills, green things thriving against the odds. A bookshelf overflowed with secondhand paperbacks and library finds. The couch was old and the TV was older, but when they sat together watching basketball games or nature documentaries, it was the richest place Miles could imagine. He started the coffee, cheap grocery store brand, but he'd gotten good at making it taste better than it should, and pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. Wednesday meant pancakes. It was their tradition, started when Noah was 5 and demanded circle breakfast. 7 years later, they still kept it going. Noah emerged from his bedroom as Miles was mixing batter, already dressed in jeans and his favorite hoodie, a blue one with a faded Superman logo that was getting too small, but Noah refused to give up. "Morning, Dad." Noah dropped into a chair at their tiny kitchen table, his dark hair sticking up in every direction. He had his mother's eyes, warm brown and quick to laugh, and it still startled Miles sometimes how much the kid looked like Sarah, how much he'd grown in the 5 years since she'd died. "Morning, superstar. Sleep good?" "Yeah. Dreamed about the Science Olympiad again." Noah grinned. "We won nationals. I gave a speech." "Well, regionals are next month, so that's a start." Miles poured batter onto the griddle, watching it bubble and spread. "You nervous?" "Kind of, but mostly excited." Noah grabbed the orange juice from the fridge without being asked, another small victory. "Mr. Patterson says our robotics project is really good, like really good. He thinks we might actually place." Pride swelled in Miles' chest. Noah was smart, not just grade smart, but curious smart. The kind of kid who took apart old electronics to see how they worked and read physics books for fun. The kind of kid who was going somewhere. The kind of kid who deserved better than a father who collected garbage for a living. Miles pushed the thought away. It came sometimes, usually in the early morning when he was tired and the world felt heavy. The guilt that he couldn't give Noah more. That Noah's friends had parents with college degrees and office jobs and houses in the suburbs, while Miles could barely afford their apartment on a sanitation worker's salary. But then Noah would laugh at something, or excitedly explain some scientific concept Miles barely understood, and Miles would remember, his son was happy, his son was loved. That was worth more than any degree. Pancakes are up, Miles announced, sliding 3 golden circles onto Noah's plate. Eat fast, though. I gotta leave for my route in 20 minutes. They ate together in comfortable silence, Noah scrolling through something on his phone between bites, Miles savoring his coffee and the simple peace of morning. This was his favorite time of day, before the city woke up fully, before the noise and rush, when it was just him and his son and the quiet promise of another day to get things right. Dad? Noah looked up from his phone. Can Tyler come over this weekend? His mom says it's okay if it's okay with you. Course it is. You guys gonna work on your project? Yeah, and maybe play some video games. Noah hesitated. Is that okay? I know money's tight right now. Something in Miles's chest cracked a little. 12 years old, and his son was already worrying about money, already learning to make himself smaller to fit their budget. Hey. Miles reached across the table, caught Noah's hand. We're doing fine. You want to have your friend over? You have your friend over? We'll order pizza, play games, the whole deal, okay? Noah's smile could have powered the whole city. Okay, thanks, Dad. They cleaned up together, another tradition. Then Miles grabbed his lunch bag from the fridge while Noah shouldered his backpack. They walked down to the street together, where Miles's old Honda was parked under a streetlight that had been broken for 3 months. You got everything? Miles asked as Noah climbed into the passenger seat. Math homework, science project notes? Got it all. You gonna be home for dinner? Should be. Route's just Society Hill today, so I'll be done by 3. Miles started the car, which coughed twice before turning over. What are you thinking? Tacos? Always tacos. They grinned at each other, and for a moment it was perfect. Just a father and son heading into their day, armed with nothing but pancakes and bad jokes and love enough to weather anything. Miles dropped Noah at school, a public middle school in Fishtown that was underfunded but had good teachers who actually cared, then headed to the sanitation depot in South Philly. The sun was just starting to crack the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and amber that made even the graffitied walls look beautiful. His crew was already gathering when he arrived, Chuck and Antonio, who'd been doing this job for 20 years and knew every alley in the city, and young Marcus, fresh out of high school and still deciding if this was a career or just a paycheck. They greeted each other with the easy camaraderie of men who worked hard together, who understood that their job might not be glamorous, but it was necessary. Society Hill today, right? Chuck asked, consulting the route sheet. Rich folks trash? Best kind, Antonio laughed. They throw away stuff we can't afford to buy. It was true. Society Hill was a different world. Historic mansions, private gates, streets so clean you could eat off them. The people who lived there wouldn't look at Miles or his crew twice, except maybe to make sure they didn't linger too long in front of their perfectly maintained properties. But their trash told stories. Expensive wine bottles and designer shopping bags, broken electronics that just needed one part replaced, furniture that was only getting tossed because it was last season's style. Miles had learned not to judge. Everyone had their life, their struggles. Just because someone had money didn't mean they had happiness. He'd seen enough to know that truth ran deep. The truck rumbled through morning traffic, the city slowly coming alive around them. By the time they reached Society Hill, the sun was fully up, gilding the cobblestones and making the old brick buildings glow like something from a history book. This neighborhood always felt like a museum to Miles, beautiful and untouchable and completely removed from real life. They worked their way down 3rd Street, the hydraulics of the truck hissing and groaning as they collected bag after bag. Miles found his rhythm quickly. Lift, toss, move, repeat. His mind wandered as his body worked, thinking about Noah's science Olympiad, about the bills coming due, about whether he needed to pick up overtime this month. He was thinking about absolutely nothing important when he turned onto Locust Street and saw the mansion. It wasn't the biggest house on the block, though it was close, but something about it caught his attention. Maybe it was the way it sat behind its iron gate like a fortress. Maybe it was the perfect landscaping that looked maintained by an army of gardeners. Maybe it was just the sheer weight of money it represented, the kind of money that could solve every problem Miles had 3 times over and still have change left. But mostly, it was the little girl in the window. She was maybe 6 or 7, with dark hair and enormous gray eyes, and she was watching him through the second-floor window with an intensity that made Miles pause mid-reach for a garbage bag. There was something about her expression. Not curious exactly, not friendly, but deeply, carefully observant. Like she was studying him, trying to figure something out. Miles smiled and raised a hand in a small wave. The girl didn't wave back, but she didn't look away either. She just kept watching as Miles and his crew worked, her small face framed in that expensive window, her eyes full of something Miles couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe. Loneliness. Recognition. "You coming or what?" Chuck called from the truck. "We got 6 more blocks." Yeah. Miles tossed the last bag into the compactor, but he glanced back at the window one more time. The little girl was still there, still watching. And Miles couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking for something she'd lost, and didn't know how to ask for it back. The garbage truck became a Thursday morning ritual that Elsie didn't know she was waiting for until it arrived. She'd started positioning herself by the window at exactly 7:15, still in her pajamas, her stuffed animals arranged on the windowsill like an audience. Mrs. Chen had noticed but said nothing. Adults had learned that Elsie's routines were sacred, that disrupting them caused shutdowns that could last for days. So when Elsie dragged her small chair to the window every Thursday and climbed up to watch the street below, Mrs. Chen simply brought her toast cut into triangles and retreated to give the child her space. Elsie didn't eat the toast. She watched. The truck always arrived between 7:20 and 7:30, rumbling down Locust Street with a sound that made the old mansion's windows rattle slightly. 3 men worked it, 2 older ones who moved with efficient boredom, and the tall one with kind eyes who'd waved at her that first morning, the one who smiled like he meant it, not like the doctors who smiled while they made her do tests she didn't understand. Elsie had learned to read smiles. Most adults smiled with just their mouths, their eyes doing something else entirely, calculating, pitying, impatient. But the garbage man smiled with his whole face, like smiling was easy and natural and didn't require anything from her in return. She liked that. She liked him. She didn't have words for why, but her chest felt less tight when she watched him work. This particular Thursday, something was different. Elsie noticed it immediately, the way she noticed everything. She'd become an expert in observation since words had stopped being safe. One of the other workers tossed a black garbage bag toward the truck, but his throw was careless, and the bag split open midair, spilling its contents across the pristine cobblestones. Elsie leaned forward, her breath fogging the window. Clothes, old magazines, broken picture frames, and there, tumbling across the street like something drowning, was Mr. Buttons. Elsie's teddy bear, the one her father had given her, the one that had lived on her bed for 3 years until this morning when Vivian, in a rare moment of being home for breakfast, had noticed the bear's stuffing coming out of a torn seam and declared it unhygienic and time for an upgrade. Before Elsie could react, before she could protect what was hers, Vivian had swept Mr. Buttons into the trash bag with brisk efficiency and a speech about how big girls didn't need ratty old toys. Elsie had tried to explain with her hands, with her eyes, with the desperate pulling at Vivian's sleeve that meant, please, please, that's important, that's daddy's, please don't take it. But Vivian was already late for a meeting, already distracted, already halfway out the door with instructions for Mrs. Chen to order a new stuffed animal online, something age-appropriate and educational. And now, Mr. Buttons was in the street, one button eye hanging by a thread, his threadbare fur catching the morning light. Elsie pressed both palms against the window hard enough that her hands went white. Her throat closed up the way it always did when feelings got too big, when the words she couldn't say started piling up behind her teeth like a dam about to break. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to do something, anything, but her body had forgotten how to make sounds that mattered. Down on the street, the kind-eyed garbage man had noticed the spilled bag. He was crouching, gathering the scattered contents with care, even though it was trash, even though no one was watching except a little girl in a window who couldn't tell him it mattered. His hand closed around Mr. Buttons. Elsie's heart stopped. The man straightened, holding the bear carefully. He examined it for a moment. The missing eye, the torn seam, the places where Elsie had loved it so hard the fabric had worn thin. Then he did something Elsie didn't expect. He looked up, right at her window, right at her. Their eyes met, and Elsie saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Like he knew, somehow, that this wasn't just trash, that this battered bear meant something to someone. He smiled, that full-face smile, and held Mr. Buttons up as if to say, "Is this yours?" Elsie nodded so hard her whole body moved. The garbage man glanced around, then made a decision. Instead of tossing Mr. Buttons into the compactor with the rest of the trash, he tucked the bear into his jacket pocket. Then he pointed at Elsie, pointed at the gate, and held up one finger. "Wait 1 minute." Elsie scrambled off her chair so fast she knocked over 2 stuffed animals. Her heart was hammering, her hands shaking with something that felt like hope and terror mixed together. She ran to her bedroom door, then stopped. Mrs. Chen was downstairs. Vivian was already at work. Miss Patricia wasn't coming to drive her to school for another hour. Going downstairs meant breaking routine. Breaking routine meant anxiety spiraling, meant everything feeling wrong and unsafe and too big. But Mr. Buttons was down there, and the kind garbage man was waiting, and Elsie's feet made the decision before her brain could catch up. She ran down the grand staircase in her pajamas, her bare feet silent on the imported tile, her breath coming in small gasps that might have been panic or might have been something else entirely. Mrs. Chen looked up from the kitchen in surprise. "Elsie, what's wrong, sweetheart?" Elsie didn't stop. She ran to the front door, wrestled with the handle. When had it gotten so heavy? And finally yanked it open. Cold October air rushed in, carrying the smell of autumn leaves and distant coffee and exhaust from the idling garbage truck. The kind man was standing on the other side of the iron gate, Mr. Buttons cradled in his large, weathered hands. He looked startled to see her, then concerned. "Hey there," he said gently, crouching down to her level even though the gate separated them. "I thought maybe this belonged to you. Saw you watching from the window." Elsie nodded, her hands gripping the iron bars of the gate. Up close she could see that the man had smile lines around his eyes, and calluses on his palms, and a name tag on his uniform that said M. Carter. He smelled like coffee and something else, something warm that reminded Elsie of the way her father used to smell when he came home from work, and picked her up and spun her around until she laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. "He looks pretty special," Mr. Carter continued, examining the bear. "This missing button here, that happened recently?" Elsie shook her head. The button had fallen off last year. She'd kept it in a small box on her dresser, but she didn't know how to explain that without words. "I bet we could fix him up," the man said thoughtfully. "My son's good at that kind of thing, sewing stuff back together." "Would you like me to do that? Clean him up a bit, maybe stitch this seam?" For a moment, Elsie forgot that she didn't talk anymore. Her mouth actually opened, shaped around the word yes, but nothing came out except a small breath of air. The frustration of it, of having things to say and no way to say them, made her eyes burn with tears she'd learned not to cry. But M. Carter didn't push. He didn't demand words or explanations or eye contact or any of the 1,000 things the doctors always wanted. He just smiled his real smile and said, "Tell you what, how about I take him home, patch him up tonight, and bring him back next Thursday? Does your mom usually come out, or should I just ring the bell?" Elsie's hands tightened on the gate bars. She wanted to explain that her mom wouldn't understand, that Vivian would be angry about the garbage man having their address, that bringing Mr. Buttons back would cause problems Elsie couldn't articulate, but she also wanted her bear back, wanted it so badly her chest ached. She nodded again slowly. "Okay then." M. Carter carefully tucked Mr. Buttons back into his jacket. "Next Thursday, 7:30 sharp. I'll bring him back good as new, that's a promise." He paused, then added softly, "You take care of yourself, okay? And hey, I'm Miles. Miles Carter. It's nice to meet you." He held out his hand through the gate bars, not to shake. She was too small for that, but just to offer. Like he was giving her a choice about connection, about trust, about whether she wanted to bridge the gap between them. Elsie looked at his hand for a long moment. Then, very carefully, she reached through the bars and placed her small palm against his larger one. His skin was warm and rough and steady. For just a second, she let herself imagine what it would be like to have a hand like that to hold on to all the time. A hand that didn't let go. A hand that meant what it promised. Miles gave her fingers a gentle squeeze, then released. "See you next Thursday, kiddo." He stood and walked back to his truck, where the other workers were waiting with varying degrees of impatience. Elsie watched until the truck rumbled away down Locust Street, until she couldn't see the flash of Miles's jacket anymore. until the street was empty and quiet again, except for her heartbeat saying, Thursday, Thursday, next Thursday. Elsie, Mrs. Chen's voice came from behind her, worried and gentle. What are you doing outside, sweetie? You'll catch cold. Elsie let herself be led back inside, let Mrs. Chen fuss about her bare feet and whether she needed a sweater and had she eaten her toast. But she wasn't really listening. She was counting days in her head. 7 of them. 7 days until Miles came back. 7 days until she got Mr. Buttons back. 7 days until she could see that smile again. It was something to hold on to, something to wait for. And Elsie had gotten very good at waiting. Vivian was in the middle of a conference call with Singapore when her assistant knocked on her office door with an expression that meant trouble. Vivian muted her microphone, her jaw tight with irritation. This better be urgent, Diane. Mrs. Chen called. Diane's voice was carefully neutral. Elsie had an episode this morning. The bottom dropped out of Vivian's stomach. What kind of episode? Is she hurt? No, nothing like that. But apparently she ran outside in her pajamas and wouldn't come back in for almost 10 minutes. Mrs. Chen said she was standing at the gate, just standing there, and wouldn't respond to anything. Vivian closed her eyes. Not hurt was good. Not hurt meant manageable. But standing at the gate meant something had triggered her, meant something had disrupted the carefully maintained routine that kept Elsie functional. Did Mrs. Chen say what caused it? No, Elsie can't explain, obviously. But Miss Patricia said Elsie was agitated all morning at school too, wouldn't participate in circle time, kept going to the window. Vivian's hand tightened on her pen hard enough that the plastic creaked. This was the part she hated most, the not knowing, the feeling of trying to solve a puzzle when half the pieces were invisible and the other half kept changing shape. Tell Mrs. Chen I'll be home by 6, Vivian said finally, and cancel my dinner with the Hanover group. But that's the 3rd time you've canceled on them. Diane, Vivian's voice could have cut glass. Cancel it. She unmuted the Singapore call and forced herself back into the discussion of server infrastructure and data security protocols, but her mind was 3 miles away in a mansion in Society Hill, trying to understand what had upset her daughter badly enough to break routine, trying to solve a problem she'd been failing to solve for 3 years. The call lasted another excruciating hour. By the time Vivian made it back to the mansion, the sun was setting and her head was pounding with the particular ache that came from smiling through disaster. She found Elsie in her room, surrounded by stuffed animals again. But something was different. One space on the windowsill was conspicuously empty, a gap between the purple elephant and the striped giraffe where something clearly belonged but was missing. Hey, sweetheart, Vivian said, keeping her voice light. Mrs. Chen said you had a hard morning. Elsie didn't look up from her arranging. Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Can you show me what's wrong? Maybe I can help. Nothing. Just the careful placement of a small blue rabbit, adjusted 3 times until it was precisely right. Elsie, please. The plea cracked out of Vivian before she could stop it, raw and desperate. Please just give me something. Anything. I can't help if you won't let me in. For a moment, Elsie's hands paused. She looked at the empty space on the windowsill, then at Vivian, and her gray eyes were full of something that looked almost like accusation. Like she was saying without words, you did this, you took it, you don't even remember. But Vivian had no idea what she'd taken, no idea what was missing, no idea how to bridge the chasm between them that seemed to grow wider every single day. I'm sorry, Vivian whispered, and she meant it for everything, for this morning, for yesterday, for every moment since Richard died when she'd chosen the wrong thing, said the wrong thing, been the wrong thing. I'm so sorry, baby. Elsie turned back to her animals, and Vivian understood she'd been dismissed. She stood and left, closing the door softly behind her, and made it all the way to her own bedroom before the tears came. Silent, furious tears that she wiped away viciously because crying didn't solve problems. Crying didn't close mergers or heal daughters, or fix lives that had shattered like glass. Crying was indulgent. Crying was weak. Crying was something Vivian Sterling couldn't afford. So she stopped. She washed her face, took 2 Advil, and went back to her laptop to review tomorrow's contracts. Because work was something she could control. Work was something she was good at. Work was the one place where her efforts produced measurable results. Work didn't look at her with gray eyes full of grief and silently break her heart over and over again. Miles brought Mr. Buttons home that night like he was carrying something precious, which, he supposed, he was. Noah looked up from his homework when Miles laid the bear carefully on the kitchen table. Dad? Did you rob a toy store?" "Found him in the trash on my route," Miles explained, examining the damage more closely under the kitchen light. "Belonged to a little girl. Thought maybe we could fix him up." Noah pushed his textbook aside, immediately interested. "She just threw him away?" "I don't think she did. I think maybe her mom did." Miles thought about those gray eyes in the window, the desperate way the girl had nodded when he asked if the bear was hers. She looked pretty upset about it. "That's messed up." Noah picked up the bear gently, his fingers finding the torn seam. "But yeah, we can totally fix this. I've got my sewing kit from when we did that cosplay repair for Tyler's costume." They worked on Mr. Buttons together, Noah stitching the seam with careful precision, while Miles cleaned the fur with gentle soap and a soft brush. It was peaceful work, the kind that didn't require conversation but felt better for being shared. Miles liked these moments with his son. The quiet collaboration, the sense that they were a team tackling something together, even if that something was just a stuffed bear. "Dad," Noah said after a while, not looking up from his stitching, "how come people with money throw away stuff that still matters?" Miles considered the question carefully. "I don't think it's about money, exactly. I think sometimes when you have a lot, it's easy to forget that things can be precious even when they're broken. Easy to think you can just replace everything. But you can't replace everything." "No," Miles agreed quietly. "You can't." Noah finished his stitching and held up the bear. The seam was closed, neat and tidy, though the missing button eye gave Mr. Buttons a jaunty pirate-like appearance. "Should we try to find a button for the eye?" "I think he's perfect just the way he is," Miles said. "Shows he's been loved, been through things. That's worth more than being perfect." They left Mr. Buttons on the kitchen counter to dry overnight, and Miles tried not to think too hard about why this felt important. Why returning a stuffed bear to a little girl he'd met for 30 seconds through a gate felt like the most significant thing he'd done all week. He dreamed that night about Sarah, his wife, Noah's mother, the woman who'd died 5 years ago from an aneurysm that came out of nowhere and took her away in the space between breakfast and lunch. She was standing in their old apartment, the one they'd lived in when Noah was small, and she was holding Mr. Buttons. "You always had a soft heart, Miles," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Warm, slightly teasing, full of love. "That little girl at the gate, she needs someone with a soft heart." "I barely know her," Miles said in the dream. "I'm just returning her bear." Sarah smiled. "You're doing more than that. You're seeing her. That's what she needs most." Miles woke with tears on his face and Sarah's voice still echoing in his ears. He lay in the dark for a long time, thinking about grief and children and the ways broken things found each other. The days crawled by for Elsie with agonizing slowness. She marked them in her head like a prisoner counting down a sentence. 6 days, 5 days, 4 days until Thursday. Until Miles came back. Until she got Mr. Buttons back. Until something in her world would be right again. School was harder than usual. Her teacher, Miss Patricia, was kind but persistent, always trying to coax Elsie into participating and engaging and all the other words that meant talking when Elsie had no words to give. Circle time was the worst. All the other children chattering about their weekends and their pets and their siblings, while Elsie sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap, counting the minutes until she could retreat to the quiet corner with the books. The other children had stopped trying to include her months ago. At first they'd been curious. Why doesn't Elsie talk? What's wrong with her? But curiosity had faded into indifference and then into the casual cruelty of children who didn't understand difference. "Elsie's weird," she'd heard Marcus Chen whisper during art class. "My mom says she's broken." Broken. The word had lodged in Elsie's chest like a stone. Was she broken? Was that why her mother looked at her with that expression, the one that was half love and half frustration and half something Elsie didn't have a name for? Was that why the doctors kept coming, kept testing, kept trying to fix her like she was a machine with faulty wiring? But Miles hadn't looked at her like she was broken. Miles had looked at her like she was visible, like she mattered exactly as she was. 3 days until Thursday, then 2, then 1. Elsie could barely sleep the night before, her mind spinning with anxiety and anticipation. What if Miles forgot? What if he decided Mr. Buttons wasn't worth the effort? What if he came and Vivian was there and got angry, and everything got ruined like everything always got ruined? But when Thursday morning arrived and Elsie took her position at the window, her stuffed animal audience arranged carefully around her, she heard it right on schedule. The rumble of the garbage truck, the hydraulic hiss of the compactor, the voices of the workers calling to each other in the quiet street. And there was Miles, climbing out of the truck with something tucked under his arm. Elsie's heart jumped into her throat. She ran downstairs again, not caring that she was breaking routine, not caring that Mrs. Chen called after her in surprise. She yanked open the front door and then the gate. When had she learned to work the gate latch? And suddenly she was outside, actually outside the protective walls of the mansion, standing on the cobblestone street in her pajamas and bare feet with the October wind biting at her skin. Miles was walking up the path and his face broke into that smile when he saw her. "Well, good morning. I was just about to ring the bell." He knelt down, bringing himself to her level, and held out Mr. Buttons. "Here you go, kiddo, all fixed up and good as new." Elsie took her bear with shaking hands. Miles had done more than just clean and stitch him. Mr. Buttons smelled like lavender detergent. His fur was soft and fluffy again, and around his neck was a small red ribbon tied in a careful bow. The missing button eye was still gone, but somehow that made him more perfect, not less. Made him hers. "My son Noah helped," Miles explained. "He's real good at fixing things. Said to tell you that anyone who loves a bear this hard is good people." Something shifted in Elsie's chest. The stone feeling, the broken feeling, loosened just a little. She clutched Mr. Buttons to her chest and looked up at Miles, trying to find a way to say thank you. "This matters." "You saw me without words." Miles seemed to understand anyway. "You're welcome, sweetheart. And hey," he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and shiny. The missing button. "I found this in the bear's stuffing. Thought maybe you'd want to keep it, even if we don't sew it back on. Sometimes the broken parts are worth remembering, too." He placed the button in Elsie's palm, and their eyes met. And Elsie understood that he knew. Somehow, impossibly, this garbage man with the kind eyes knew about loss and grief and the way certain things became precious because they were all you had left of the people who'd disappeared. She nodded, closing her fist around the button, and Miles squeezed her shoulder gently before standing. "You take care now," he said, "and if Mr. Buttons ever needs repairs again, you just let me know, okay?" He started back toward the truck, and Elsie's feet moved before her brain could tell them not to. She ran after him, grabbed the edge of his jacket, held on tight. Miles turned, surprised. "Hey, what's wrong?" Elsie didn't know how to explain that she didn't want him to leave. That his leaving felt like her father leaving all over again, the truck pulling away, the person disappearing, the world becoming smaller and colder and more silent than before. She just held on to his jacket and tried not to cry. "Elsie?" Mrs. Chen's voice, worried and approaching fast. "Elsie, sweetheart, come back inside." Miles looked from Elsie to the housekeeper, something understanding shifting in his expression. "Is it okay if I talk to her for just a minute?" he asked Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen hesitated, clearly uncertain about protocol, but something in Miles's gentle tone must have reassured her. "Just a minute. She needs to get ready for school." Miles crouched back down and very gently loosened Elsie's grip on his jacket. "Hey, I know goodbyes are hard, but I'll be back next Thursday, okay? Same time, same place. That's what I do. I come here every Thursday for the trash pickup, so you can see me again. You can count on that." Every Thursday. The words settled into Elsie's chest like an anchor. Not a one-time thing, not a person who'd disappear forever. A promise, a pattern, something reliable. She let go of his jacket and nodded, tears tracking down her cheeks, even though she was trying hard not to cry. "That's my girl," Miles said softly. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket. Who even carried handkerchiefs anymore? And gently wiped her tears. "It's okay to be sad. It's okay to miss people. But you've got Mr. Buttons back now, and you've got me coming every Thursday, and that's something, right?" Elsie nodded again. "Okay then." Miles stood, handed the handkerchief to Mrs. Chen with a quiet, "She can keep it," and walked back to his truck. This time Elsie let him go. She stood at the gate watching the truck rumble away, mister. Buttons held tight in one arm and Miles's handkerchief clutched in her other hand, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Small and fragile and terrifying, but real. Behind her, Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway looking troubled. And somewhere in a downtown office, a phone was ringing with a call that would change everything. But Elsie didn't know about any of that yet. All she knew was that Thursday would come again. That Miles would come again. That someone in the world saw her and didn't need her to be anything except exactly who she was. For now, that was enough. The photo hit the internet at 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Miles had returned Mr. Buttons. Vivian was in the middle of negotiating the final terms of the Singapore merger when Diane burst into her office without knocking. A violation of protocol so severe that Vivian knew immediately something was catastrophically wrong. "You need to see this," Diane said, her face pale as she thrust her tablet across the desk. The image filled the screen, crystal clear despite being taken from a distance. Elsie stood at the mansion's iron gate in her school uniform, her face tilted up with an expression Vivian hadn't seen in 3 years, pure, uncomplicated joy. She was smiling. Actually smiling, her whole face transformed by it, and she was reaching through the gate bars to hand something to a man in a sanitation worker's uniform. The man was crouched at her level, accepting whatever Elsie was giving him. It looked like a drawing, brightly colored construction paper, with a smile that matched her daughter's. His hand was resting gently on Elsie's where their fingers met through the bars, and the whole image radiated a warmth, an intimacy, that made Vivian's stomach twist with something she couldn't immediately name. The caption read, "Billionaire CEO's daughter finds friendship in unexpected place. Elsie Sterling, 6, shares a moment with sanitation worker outside family's $4.5 million Society Hill mansion. Sources say the two have been meeting regularly for weeks. Full story at link." "It's already been shared 40,000 times, Diane said quietly. TMZ picked it up. So did the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thomas Brennan called. The board wants an emergency meeting." Vivian stared at the photo, her mind racing through implications like a computer processing data. The optics were disastrous. Her daughter, heiress to a tech fortune, befriending the help. The class implications. The security concerns, the inevitable questions about Vivian's fitness as a mother, as a CEO, as a person capable of managing her own household, let alone a billion-dollar company. But underneath all of that, underneath the panic and the fury and the corporate damage control instincts was something else, something small and sharp and devastating. Her daughter was smiling. Elsie was smiling at a stranger, a garbage man, with more genuine happiness than she'd shown Vivian in 3 years. Elsie had clearly been seeing this man regularly, and Vivian hadn't even noticed, hadn't known, hadn't paid enough attention to see that her daughter had formed the first real connection she'd made since Richard died. And Vivian's first instinct wasn't gratitude. It was rage. "Cancel my afternoon," she heard herself say, her voice cold and controlled. "I'm going home." "What about the Singapore call? They're waiting for your—" "Diane." Vivian stood, gathering her things with sharp, precise movements. "Handle it." She made it to her car before the trembling started. By the time the Tesla pulled into the mansion's driveway 20 minutes later, Vivian's hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. The street was empty. No paparazzi yet, though they'd come soon enough. But she could feel the weight of watching eyes behind curtained windows. The neighbors would be talking. The social circles she'd worked so hard to penetrate would be whispering. Poor Vivian Sterling can't even control her own child. Mrs. Chen met her at the door, her expression anxious. "Mrs. Sterling, I didn't know you were coming home." "Where is she?" "In her room. But Mrs. Sterling, I should explain." Vivian brushed past, taking the stairs 2 at a time. She found Elsie exactly where she expected, sitting by the window with Mr. Buttons, a pile of construction paper drawings spread around her. The drawings were all of the same subject, a tall man with a kind face, standing next to a garbage truck, holding hands with a small girl, over and over. The same image, variations on a theme, a record of connection that Vivian had been too blind to see. Elsie. Vivian's voice came out harder than she intended. We need to talk. Elsie looked up, and the smile that had been on her face, the smile from the photo, that radiant expression Vivian had been chasing with specialists and therapy for 3 years, died instantly. Her daughter's face shuttered closed like a door slamming, and she clutched Mr. Buttons tighter to her chest. That man, Vivian said, struggling to keep her tone even. The garbage collector. How long have you been talking to him? Elsie's eyes went wide, not with guilt, but with something that looked like fear. She shook her head slightly, her arms wrapping around the bear like it could protect her. Mrs. Chen should have told me, Vivian continued, pacing the small space between the bed and the window. Should have told me you were interacting with strangers? Do you understand how dangerous that is? Do you know what could happen? Still nothing. Just those gray eyes, Richard's eyes, watching her with an expression that was becoming increasingly familiar. Disappointment, judgment. The silent accusation that Vivian was getting everything wrong again. I'm not trying to punish you, Vivian said, and she could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. I'm trying to protect you. That's my job, Elsie, to keep you safe. And I can't do that if you're forming attachments to people we don't know, people who could... She stopped. Because Elsie was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face, and she was shaking her head back and forth in a gesture that was becoming frantic. Her small hands were making shapes, pointing at Mr. Buttons, then at the window, then pressing against her chest, trying to communicate something Vivian couldn't understand. I don't know what you're trying to say, Vivian snapped, and immediately hated herself for the harshness of it. I can't read your mind, Elsie. I need you to use your words. I need you to help me understand. But Elsie just cried harder, her body curling into itself, retreating into that internal space where Vivian couldn't reach her. And the worst part, the absolutely devastating part, was that Vivian knew she'd caused this. Knew that her fear and her anger and her desperate need to control an uncontrollable situation had just shattered whatever fragile bridge her daughter had been building back to the world. I'm sorry, Vivian whispered, sinking down onto Elsie's bed. I'm sorry, baby. I'm just scared. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared of failing you. I'm scared that... Her phone buzzed. Thomas Brennan, calling for the 3rd time. The board meeting would be starting soon. They'd want answers, explanations, a plan for damage control. They'd want Vivian to prove she could manage her personal life and her professional responsibilities, that this incident wouldn't affect the company's image or the Singapore merger or shareholder confidence. Vivian looked at her crying daughter, then at her buzzing phone. For a moment, one crystalline moment, she saw herself from the outside. Saw what she was choosing. Saw the pattern she'd been repeating since Richard died, putting out fires and solving problems and managing crises while Elsie suffered alone in her silence. She declined the call. I'm staying, she said out loud, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Elsie or herself. The board can wait. Work can wait. You're more important. Elsie looked up, surprised enough that her tears paused. I mean it, Vivian continued, setting her phone face down on the dresser. I'm going to sit right here and I'm not going anywhere. And when you're ready, if you're ready, maybe you can show me these drawings. Tell me about your friend. Help me understand. For a long time, Elsie just stared at her, testing maybe, waiting to see if Vivian meant it, if this promise would hold or crumble like all the others. Vivian stayed still, her hands folded in her lap, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to check her email, return calls, manage the crisis spinning out of control downtown. Finally, slowly, Elsie reached for one of the drawings. She held it out to Vivian with shaking hands. It showed 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing on opposite sides of a gate. Between them, cradled in both their hands, was a teddy bear with one missing eye. Above the drawing, in careful letters that someone had helped Elsie spell, were 3 words. He sees me. Vivian's throat closed. The bear. Mr. Buttons. He found him? Elsie nodded. And he brought him back to you. Another nod, more vigorous this time. And now you wait for him, every Thursday, because he keeps coming back. Elsie's whole body seemed to release some tension Vivian hadn't realized she was carrying. She nodded again, and this time she reached for another drawing, this one showing three figures: a tall man, a small girl, and in the middle, slightly faded as if Elsie had tried to erase it, was another figure. A woman with long dark hair and a briefcase, her back turned to the other two. Vivian felt like she'd been punched. "Is that supposed to be me?" Elsie looked down at her lap, her fingers twisting in Mr. Button's fur. "You think I'm not there," Vivian said slowly, understanding dawning cold and terrible. "You think I'm always leaving?" A tiny nod, almost imperceptible. But there. The phone buzzed again, and again. Vivian ignored it. She slid off the bed and onto the floor beside Elsie, not touching. She'd learned that Elsie needed space when she was upset, but close enough that their knees almost touched. "You're right," Vivian said quietly. "I have been leaving. I've been so focused on fixing things, on finding solutions, on making everything perfect that I haven't been here. Really, here, with you." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "This man, the garbage collector, what's his name?" Elsie reached for another drawing. This one had a name written at the top in the same careful letters: Miles. "Miles," Vivian repeated. "He's been kind to you." Elsie nodded emphatically, her eyes brightening slightly. "And he doesn't ask you to talk." Another nod. "He just sees you, exactly as you are." The look Elsie gave her then was so full of longing, so desperate for Vivian to understand that it physically hurt. Vivian thought about all the specialists she'd hired, all the therapists who'd tried to make Elsie fit their models of trauma and recovery, all the times she'd pushed for progress, for improvement, for Elsie to be who she used to be instead of accepting who she'd become. And this stranger, this sanitation worker named Miles, had apparently figured out in a few Thursday mornings what Vivian had been missing for 3 years. "I need to meet him," Vivian said. It wasn't a question, but Elsie recoiled anyway, her arms tightening around Mr. Button's. "Hey, no, I'm not going to stop him from seeing you. I need to understand. I need to know that he's safe, that his intentions are good. Can you understand that?" Elsie looked uncertain, torn between trust and fear. Finally, she held up 7 fingers. 7 days? Next Thursday? A nod. "Okay," Vivian agreed. "Next Thursday, I'll be here. I'll meet Miles. And Elsie." She waited until her daughter's eyes met hers. "Thank you for showing me these drawings. Thank you for trying to help me understand. I know I haven't made it easy." Elsie studied her for a long moment, then carefully selected one more drawing from the pile. This one was different from the others. It showed the mansion, but the gate was open. The woman figure was in the foreground now, not turned away, and she was kneeling. The small girl was reaching for her, and between them was a heart, bright red and carefully colored. "Is this what you want?" Vivian asked, her voice cracking. "You want the gate to be open?" Elsie nodded, and then she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She leaned forward just slightly and rested her head against Vivian's shoulder. It lasted maybe 5 seconds before Elsie pulled away, retreating back to her safe distance. But those 5 seconds felt like a lifetime, felt like hope. Vivian's phone was buzzing continuously now, a dozen missed calls lighting up the screen. She picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then made a decision. She typed out a message to her assistant. "Tell the board I'll meet with them tomorrow. Family emergency, non-negotiable." Then she turned the phone off completely. "What do you want to do for the rest of the day?" she asked Elsie. "We could read, or we could go to the park, or we could just sit here with your drawings, whatever you want." Elsie pointed at the bookshelf, where her favorite story, the one about the little prince and his rose, sat gathering dust. So Vivian read. She sat on Elsie's floor and read about planets and roses and foxes that needed to be tamed, and somewhere around chapter 3, Elsie shifted closer. Not touching, but nearer. Building a bridge one careful inch at a time. They were still sitting there when Mrs. Chen knocked softly on the door 2 hours later. "Mrs. Sterling, there's someone at the gate. He says his name is Miles Carter, and he wanted to make sure everything was all right." Vivian's head snapped up. "He's here? Now?" "He saw the news," Mrs. Chen said carefully. "He seemed concerned about Elsie." Elsie was already on her feet, her eyes bright with something that looked like panic and hope mixed together. She grabbed Vivian's hand, the first time she'd initiated touch in months, and pulled. "You want me to come with you?" Vivian asked. Elsie nodded frantically. So Vivian let herself be led down the stairs and out the front door, her heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with board meetings, or mergers, or corporate damage control. At the gate stood a tall man in a sanitation uniform, his truck parked at the curb behind him. He had kind eyes and work-worn hands, and the sort of face that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. He looked worried. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said when he saw Vivian. "I'm Miles Carter. I saw the photo online and I wanted to make sure Elsie was okay, that I hadn't caused problems for her." Vivian opened her mouth to say something cutting, something about boundaries and appropriateness, and how dare he involve himself in her daughter's life without permission. But then she felt Elsie's hand tighten around hers, felt her daughter press close to her side, and she looked at Miles, really looked at him. She saw a man who'd driven here on his lunch break, still in his work uniform, to check on a little girl he barely knew. A man who'd taken the time to repair a stuffed bear and return it with a ribbon. A man who, according to the drawings upstairs, had been treating Elsie with more genuine care than half the specialists Vivian had paid thousands of dollars to help her daughter. "She's okay?" Vivian said finally. "Or she will be. Thank you for asking." Miles visibly relaxed. "Good. That's good." He crouched down to Elsie's level. "Hey, kiddo, you doing all right? I was worried when I saw all those cameras and stuff online." Elsie nodded, but she didn't let go of Vivian's hand. She looked between the two adults, her expression anxious, like she was waiting for something to explode. "Mr. Carter," Vivian said carefully, "I'd like to talk to you. Would you be willing to come back Thursday morning, at your usual time?" Miles looked surprised. "You want me to keep coming?" "I want to understand what you've been doing for my daughter," Vivian clarified. "I want to know who you are and why you care. And I want—" She paused, swallowed her pride. "I want to learn from you, because clearly you figured out something I've been missing." Understanding flickered across Miles's face, and something that might have been respect. "Thursday morning, 7:30. I'll be here." He stood, gave Elsie a gentle smile, and turned to leave. But Vivian found herself calling after him. "Mr. Carter, thank you, for seeing her, for being kind." Miles turned back, and his smile was warm and real. "She makes it easy, Mrs. Sterling. She's a pretty special kid." After he left, Vivian and Elsie stood at the gate together, hand in hand, watching the garbage truck rumble away down the cobblestone street. The autumn wind carried the smell of distant coffee and fallen leaves, and somewhere a dog was barking, and the world kept turning exactly as it always had. But something had shifted. Something had cracked open in Vivian's carefully controlled life, and she had no idea what would grow in the space it left behind. "Come on," she said softly to Elsie. "Let's go back inside. We still have 4 more chapters to read." Elsie squeezed her hand once before letting go, and together they walked back to the mansion. The gate stood open behind them, and for the first time in years, Vivian didn't immediately lock it. What? The board meeting the next morning was every bit as brutal as Vivian had anticipated. She sat at the head of the conference table in her corner office, facing 8 men who looked at her with varying degrees of concern, disappointment, and barely concealed satisfaction that she'd finally proven herself fallible. Thomas Brennan led the charge. "This photo has been shared over 2 million times now. It's trending on 3 different platforms. The narrative is that you're so absent as a mother that your daughter has to find parental figures in the help." "Miles Carter isn't the help," Vivian said coldly. "He's a city employee who happened to show my daughter basic human kindness, something we could all learn from." "Optics, Vivian." Brennan leaned forward. "This is about optics. Sterling Technologies is built on your image as a successful woman who can balance it all: career, motherhood, innovation. This photo suggests that's a lie." "Maybe it is," Vivian said quietly. The room went silent. "Maybe I can't balance it all," she continued, the words coming out steady despite the fear thrumming through her veins. "Maybe I've been failing at the motherhood part spectacularly. Maybe my daughter has been suffering while I've been in meetings like this one, talking about optics and image instead of being present for the people who actually matter. Marcus Wu cleared his throat uncomfortably. Vivian, no one's suggesting you're a bad mother, aren't you? She looked around the table. Because that's what this meeting is about, isn't it? You're worried that my messy personal life will affect the company, that investors will see me as distracted or incompetent, that the Singapore deal will fall through because a photo showed my daughter smiling at someone who makes her happy. The Singapore deal is worth $800 million, Brennan said flatly. So yes, we're concerned. Vivian stood, her hands pressed flat against the polished table. Here's what I know. My daughter hasn't spoken in 3 years. She's been drowning in grief, and I've been so focused on fixing her that I forgot to just be with her. And then a sanitation worker, a man who makes maybe $40,000 a year, figured out in a few conversations what I couldn't with all my money and resources. He saw her. He treated her like a person instead of a problem. And she responded. She paused, her voice dropping. So, no, I'm not going to apologize for that photo. I'm not going to put out a statement calling Miles Carter inappropriate or concerning. I'm going to thank him for caring about my child when I was too busy managing your concerns to notice she needed someone who would just show up consistently and be kind. This is professional suicide, Brennan said. You understand that, don't you? The shareholders will do what shareholders do, Vivian cut him off. They'll panic and speculate, and maybe some of them will sell. But I built this company on innovation and integrity, and I'm not going to sacrifice either of those things because you're afraid of bad publicity. She gathered her tablet and briefcase. The Singapore merger will close on schedule. I'll handle it. But I'm also going to start leaving this office at 5 p.m. I'm going to have dinner with my daughter. I'm going to read her bedtime stories. I'm going to be the parent she needs instead of the CEO you want me to be 24/7. And if we can't accept that? Brennan asked, his voice dangerously soft. Vivian met his eyes without flinching. Then maybe it's time to discuss whether I'm the right CEO for this company. Because I'm done choosing between my daughter and my work. I'm done pretending I can do both perfectly. I'm just going to do my best and accept that my best includes being human. She walked out before anyone could respond, her heels clicking against the marble floor with a finality that felt like breaking chains. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the elevator, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She'd just potentially destroyed everything she'd built. Put her career, her company, her entire professional reputation on the line. For what? For the chance to maybe, possibly, connect with a daughter who might not even want her anymore? But when she thought about Elsie's head resting on her shoulder yesterday, those precious 5 seconds of trust, she knew she'd made the right choice. Her phone rang as the elevator descended. Diane's voice was tight with stress when Vivian answered. The Wall Street Journal wants a comment. So does Forbes. And NBC is asking if you'll do an interview about working mothers in tech. Tell them all the same thing, Vivian said. Sterling Technologies stands behind innovation, integrity, and the principle that family comes first. No further comment. That's it? Vivian, they're going to run stories. Let them. Vivian stepped out into the parking garage, her voice echoing off concrete walls. I'm done managing narratives, Diane. I'm done spinning disasters into opportunities. I'm going to go home and have lunch with my daughter. Everything else can wait. She hung up before Diane could protest further. The drive back to Society Hill felt surreal, like she was moving through a world that had tilted slightly off its axis. The Tesla navigated familiar streets while Vivian's mind raced through implications, board votes, shareholder reactions, market responses. But underneath all the noise was something quieter, something that felt almost like peace. She was making a choice. Finally, actually choosing Elsie over everything else. And whatever came of it, at least she'd be able to look her daughter in the eye and say she'd tried. The mansion was quiet when she arrived, but she could hear music coming from Elsie's room, something classical and gentle that Mrs. Chen must have put on. Vivian climbed the stairs and found her daughter exactly where she'd left her that morning, surrounded by drawings and stuffed animals Mr. Buttons held close. Elsie looked up in surprise when Vivian appeared in the doorway. It was barely noon. Vivian never came home this early. I thought we could have lunch together, Vivian said. Maybe make sandwiches, or order from that place you like, the one with the soup. Elsie blinked, processing this disruption to routine. Then slowly, she nodded. They ate lunch at the kitchen island, tomato soup and grilled cheese that Mrs. Chen prepared while shooting Vivian curious glances. Elsie didn't talk, but she drew on her napkin with crayons, showing Vivian pictures of trees and birds and a small figure that might have been her. It wasn't much. It wasn't the breakthrough Vivian had been chasing for 3 years, but it was something. A moment of shared space, of being together without agenda or pressure or the desperate need to fix what was broken. After lunch, Vivian made another choice. She called Dr. Harrison and canceled all of Elsie's appointments for the next month. All of them? Dr. Harrison sounded shocked. Mrs. Sterling, I strongly advise against interrupting Elsie's treatment protocol. She doesn't need more treatment, Vivian said firmly. She needs time. She needs space. She needs a mother who's actually present instead of shuttling her between specialists. With all due respect, you're not a trained therapist. No, Vivian agreed, but I am her mother, and I'm starting to think that matters more than credentials. She hung up and turned to find Elsie watching her from the doorway, her eyes wide and uncertain. No more appointments for a while, Vivian told her. Unless you want them. Do you want them? Elsie shook her head so vigorously her hair flew around her face. Okay then, we'll figure out what you need as we go. Together. Vivian paused. Is there anything you want to do this afternoon? Anything at all? Elsie thought for a moment, then went to the refrigerator and pulled down one of her drawings, the one showing the park, with swings and slides and trees. The park, Vivian said. You want to go to the park? A nod. So they went. Vivian changed out of her business suit into jeans and a sweater. When was the last time she'd worn jeans? And they walked the 6 blocks to Delancey Park together. Elsie brought Mr. Buttons and 2 other stuffed animals, and Vivian carried a blanket and the book they'd been reading. The park was mostly empty on a Wednesday afternoon, just a few other parents with toddlers and an elderly man feeding pigeons. Elsie ran to the swings immediately, her backpack bouncing, and Vivian followed more slowly, breathing in autumn air that tasted like freedom. She pushed Elsie on the swings, higher and higher, until her daughter's legs kicked at the sky, and something that might have been laughter, silent but real, shook her small shoulders. And Vivian thought about how many afternoons like this she'd missed, how many moments of simple joy she'd traded for conference calls and strategy meetings, and the relentless pursuit of success that had left her successful and alone. When Elsie finally tired of the swings, they sat on the blanket under a tree that was dropping golden leaves like rain. Vivian read while Elsie arranged her stuffed animals in elaborate scenes, narrating silently whatever story was unfolding in her head. Vivian's phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket, emails from the board, messages from Diane, missed calls from investors who'd seen the news. She ignored all of it. For the first time in years, the urgent could wait. Her daughter was here now, building worlds out of imagination and autumn leaves, and Vivian wasn't going to miss it. Thursday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of October day that promised winter wasn't far behind. Vivian woke early, her stomach tight with nerves about meeting Miles again. This time intentionally. This time as Elsie's mother instead of an angry executive protecting her territory. She found Elsie already awake and dressed, sitting by the window with Mr. Buttons, watching the street below with an intensity that suggested she'd been there for a while. He'll be here soon, Vivian said softly, sitting beside her daughter. Are you nervous? Elsie shook her head, but her fingers were twisting in Mr. Buttons' fur, a tell Vivian had learned to recognize. She was terrified that Vivian would ruin this, would drive Miles away, would destroy the one good thing Elsie had found in her small, silent world. I promise, Vivian said, I'm not going to stop him from seeing you. I just want to talk, want to understand, okay? Elsie looked at her with those storm cloud eyes, weighing the promise, testing its strength. Finally, she nodded. At exactly 7:30, the garbage truck rumbled into view. Vivian and Elsie went down together, hand in hand, and this time Vivian opened the gate herself. Miles was already walking up the path, and he stopped when he saw them both. His expression was cautious but kind, like he was approaching something fragile that might spook. Good morning, he said. Mrs. Sterling, Elsie. Good morning, Mr. Carter, Vivian replied. She was suddenly acutely aware of how different they looked. Her in her expensive casual clothes, him in his work uniform with dirt under his fingernails, and the smell of honest labor clinging to his skin. Thank you for coming, for being willing to talk. Of course. Miles glanced at Elsie, who was watching the exchange with worried eyes. Hey, kiddo, you okay? Elsie nodded, but she pressed closer to Vivian's side. Maybe we could sit? Vivian gestured to the iron bench near the gate, decorative but functional. I promise I'm not angry. I just want to understand what's been happening, what you and Elsie have been building here. Miles sat, keeping a respectful distance. Vivian sat beside him, and Elsie positioned herself between them, close enough to touch both adults, but not quite touching either. I want you to know, Vivian began carefully, that I'm grateful for your kindness to Elsie, for seeing her when I was too blind to notice she needed someone to just be present. Miles looked surprised. You don't owe me gratitude, Mrs. Sterling. I've just been doing what felt right. That's exactly what I want to understand, Vivian said. Why? Why take the time for a child you don't know? Why go out of your way to fix her bear and keep coming back every week? I'm not accusing you of anything, she added quickly, seeing him tense. I genuinely want to know, because whatever you're doing, it's working, and I need to learn how. Miles was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I lost my wife 5 years ago. Brain aneurysm. She was gone in an afternoon. And my son Noah, he was 7, and he stopped talking for almost 6 months. Not totally silent like Elsie, but close. The grief just locked him up inside. Vivian's breath caught. And all these well-meaning people kept trying to fix him, Miles continued. Therapists and counselors and teachers who wanted him to talk about his feelings, process his trauma, move through the stages, and the harder they pushed, the more he shut down. Until I finally realized he didn't need fixing. He needed space. He needed someone to sit with him in the quiet and not demand anything except being there. He looked at Elsie, and his smile was gentle. When I saw her that first morning, watching from the window, I recognized that look, that grief that's too big for words. And when her bear ended up in the trash, I just thought, this is something small I can do. Something that doesn't require her to be anyone except who she is right now. Elsie was staring at Miles with an expression Vivian had never seen before. Not quite awe, but something close. Like she was seeing someone who understood a language she thought only she spoke. Your son, Vivian asked quietly. Did he start talking again? He did. On his own time, in his own way. It wasn't a breakthrough moment. It was gradual, like ice melting. And now he's 12 and he never stops talking. Miles laughed softly. Wants to be a scientist, smart as hell, curious about everything, but he still has hard days. Still has moments when the grief comes back and he needs to be quiet. And that's okay. It's all part of who he is. Vivian felt something crack open in her chest. All this time she'd been treating Elsie's silence like a problem to solve, a deficit to overcome. She'd been so focused on getting back the daughter she'd lost that she'd failed to see the daughter she had. I've been doing it wrong, she whispered. Everything. I've been pushing her to be who she was instead of accepting who she is. You've been scared, Miles said simply. That's what parents do when their kids are hurting. We want to fix it, make it better, but sometimes the fixing is the problem. Elsie made a small sound. Not quite a word, but close. Both adults looked at her. She was holding Mr. Buttons out to Vivian, one small hand pointing at the missing button eye. You want me to see it? Vivian asked. The broken part? Elsie nodded emphatically, then hugged the bear close, pressing it to her heart. Understanding dawned slow and painful. You're saying the broken parts are still precious, still worth loving. Another nod, and this time Elsie's eyes were full of tears that she didn't try to hide. Vivian pulled her daughter close, and this time Elsie didn't pull away. She melted into Vivian's arms, her small body shaking with silent sobs, 3 years of grief finally finding a safe place to land. I see you, Vivian whispered into Elsie's hair. I see you, baby, exactly as you are. And you're perfect. You're so perfect. Miles stood quietly, giving them space, but Vivian reached out and caught his hand before he could leave. Don't go, she said. Please. Elsie needs you. I think, I think we both do. Miles looked at their hands, her pale, manicured fingers wrapped around his work-roughened palm, and then at Elsie, who had lifted her head from Vivian's shoulder and was watching him with desperate hope. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. And this time, when he smiled, it felt like sunrise. The following Thursday, Miles brought Noah. Vivian saw them coming up the path together, father and son, matching in their ease with each other, Noah's backpack slung over one shoulder while Miles carried a paper bag that smelled like fresh pastries. She'd been waiting by the window with Elsie, both of them nervous in different ways about this next step, this expansion of their strange, fragile arrangement. Elsie had spent the entire week asking questions with her hands and her eyes and her drawings. Questions about Noah. How old? What did he like? Would he think she was weird? Would he understand about the not talking? Vivian had answered as best she could, repeating what Miles had shared about his son, about the grief they'd both survived, about how Noah had learned to be patient with silence. But knowing something intellectually and facing it in person were two entirely different things. They're here, Vivian said softly, and Elsie was already running for the stairs, mister. Buttons tucked under her arm. Vivian followed more slowly, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Over the past week, she and Miles had fallen into an unexpected rhythm. Brief conversations at the gate each morning when he came for the trash pickup, text messages throughout the day about small things, Elsie's progress or Noah's Science Olympiad project or just observations about the weather. It was nothing, really, except it felt like everything. She opened the door to find Miles on the front step with a boy who had his father's kind eyes and his mother's warm brown skin and a smile that suggested he found the world generally interesting. Noah was tall for 12, all gangly limbs and curiosity, wearing a hoodie with a periodic table on it and sneakers that had seen better days. Mrs. Sterling, Miles said, and there was something different in his voice, formality for Noah's benefit maybe, or nervousness about mixing their worlds this way. This is my son, Noah. Noah, this is Mrs. Sterling and her daughter Elsie. It's nice to meet you, Noah, Vivian said. And please, both of you, call me Vivian. Come in. She stepped aside, acutely aware that this was the first time anyone except staff had crossed the mansion's threshold in months. The last visitors had been Dr. Harrison and his colleagues, stern professionals with briefcases and diagnostic tools. But Miles and Noah entered with an ease that suggested they belonged anywhere they chose to be, tracking in autumn leaves and the smell of fresh air. Noah looked around the grand entrance hall with open curiosity, but no particular awe. Whoa! This place is huge. You could fit like 3 of our apartments in here. Then seeing Elsie half hidden behind Vivian's legs, he crouched down to her level exactly like his father had that first morning. Hey Elsie, I'm Noah. Dad told me about you. He said you're really good at drawing. Elsie peeked out from behind Vivian, her eyes wide and cautious. I brought you something, Noah continued, digging in his backpack. Dad said you like stuffed animals, so I brought you this guy. His name's Professor Squeaks. He's a hedgehog. I got him when I was little, but I think he'd like living here with you. He held out a small, well-loved stuffed hedgehog with button eyes and soft brown fur. Elsie stared at it, then at Noah, then at the hedgehog again. Very slowly, she reached out and took it, cradling it carefully alongside Mr. Buttons. He's a scientist, Noah explained seriously. That's why he's Professor Squeaks. He knows a lot about biology and chemistry, so if you ever have questions about science stuff, you can ask him. The corner of Elsie's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She hugged Professor Squeaks close and nodded her thanks. We brought breakfast, Miles said, holding up the paper bag. Thought maybe we could eat together, if that's okay. Vivian found herself nodding, leading them to the kitchen, the enormous, rarely used kitchen with its professional appliances and granite counters. Mrs. Chen had the day off, so it was just the 4 of them in the cavernous space, and Vivian felt suddenly, absurdly nervous about whether she even knew where the plates were. Miles seemed to sense her discomfort. Mind if I take point here? I'm pretty good with breakfast. Please, Vivian said, relieved. She watched as Miles moved through her kitchen with surprising confidence, finding plates and napkins, setting out the pastries he'd brought, croissants and danishes and something chocolate that made Elsie's eyes go wide. Noah helped without being asked, pouring orange juice into glasses, arranging things on the kitchen island with casual efficiency. They made it look easy, Vivian thought. This domestic choreography of care and cooperation. How long had it been since her kitchen felt like this? Like a place where people actually lived instead of just a showroom feature to photograph for magazines? They sat together at the island, Elsie and Noah on stools side by side, Miles and Vivian standing across from them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Just the sound of pastries being broken apart and orange juice being sipped and the comfortable quiet of people sharing space. Then Noah said, "So Dad tells me you go to a special school. What's that like?" Elsie looked at Vivian, a flash of panic in her eyes. But Noah didn't seem bothered by her silence. He just took another bite of croissant and waited, like he had all the time in the world. "Elsie doesn't talk right now," Vivian explained gently, "but she communicates other ways. With drawings, mostly, and gestures." "That's cool," Noah said easily. "I didn't talk for a while after my mom died. It's like sometimes words just don't fit what you're feeling, you know? Like trying to put the ocean in a cup." Elsie stared at him with something that looked like recognition, like she'd found someone who spoke her language. "But I bet you're a really good listener," Noah continued. "People who don't talk much usually are. They notice things other people miss." He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then showed Elsie a photo. "This was my mom. Her name was Sarah. She died when I was 7. The photo showed a woman with Noah's warm eyes and a smile that could light up a room. She was holding a much younger Noah, both of them laughing at something off camera. There was so much life in the image that it physically hurt to look at. Elsie studied the photo carefully, then pointed at Sarah, then at her own chest, then made a gesture like something breaking. "Yeah," Noah said quietly. "It broke a lot of things, but Dad helped put them back together. Different than before, but still good, still whole." Miles's hand found Vivian's across the counter, just a brief touch, fingers brushing fingers, but it sent warmth spreading through her chest. She looked at him and saw understanding in his eyes, the recognition of two people who'd been broken by loss and were still learning how to be whole again. "Elsie's dad died too," Vivian heard herself say. 3 years ago, cancer. He was," her voice cracked, "he was the best parts of both of us." "What was his name?" Noah asked. Richard Sterling." "That's a good name." Noah looked at Elsie. "Do you miss him?" Elsie nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Me too," Noah said simply. "I miss my mom every day, especially when something cool happens and I want to tell her about it." He paused. "But I talk to her anyway sometimes, in my head. Dad says that's okay, that the people we love don't really leave us. They just change shape." Elsie was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face, but she was also nodding vigorously. She reached for her backpack and pulled out a drawing, one Vivian hadn't seen before. It showed a man with Richard's features standing behind Elsie, his hands on her shoulders, translucent like a ghost, but clearly present. "He's still with you," Noah said, understanding immediately. "That's beautiful, Elsie, really." And then something remarkable happened. Elsie reached out and took Noah's hand, just held it, tears still falling, while Noah squeezed back gently and didn't say anything about it being weird or uncomfortable. He just held her hand and let her cry, and somehow, impossibly, it was exactly what she needed. Vivian felt her own tears starting and turned away quickly, trying to compose herself. But Miles was there, his hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "They're going to be okay," he said quietly. "Both of them. They've got each other now." Vivian nodded, not trusting her voice. After breakfast, Noah asked if he could see Elsie's room, and Elsie led him upstairs with an eagerness Vivian had never seen in her before. Miles and Vivian followed at a distance, watching as Noah examined Elsie's collection of stuffed animals with genuine interest, asking about each one's name and story. "This is an impressive setup," Noah said, surveying the precisely arranged rows. "You're really organized. I bet you'd be good at coding. It's all about organization and patterns." Elsie tilted her head curiously. "Here, I'll show you." Noah pulled out his phone again and opened an app. "See this? It's a simple game I coded for my computer science class. You tap the screen and the character jumps. Tap twice and he double jumps. It's basic, but it's built on patterns. If, then statements. If you tap, then jump. If you tap twice, then double jump. He handed the phone to Elsie, who experimented cautiously, her face lighting up when the character responded to her taps. You could totally learn this, Noah said. If you wanted, I could teach you. We could build a game together. Elsie looked at Vivian with an expression that was pure hope mixed with fear. Fear that this was too good to be true, that it would be taken away, that she wasn't allowed to want things this badly. I think that sounds wonderful, Vivian said. If Noah's willing to be patient with you learning. I've got all the patience in the world, Noah said easily. Besides, my science Olympiad partner just bailed on me, so I've got extra time on Saturdays now. We could do coding lessons then, if you want. Elsie nodded so hard her whole body moved. Vivian and Miles retreated to the hallway, giving the kids space while staying close enough to monitor. Vivian leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the morning. He's an extraordinary kid, she said quietly. You've raised him well. I've tried, Miles said. Mostly I just tried not to screw him up too badly. But Sarah, she gave him the important parts. The curiosity, the kindness, the ability to see people for who they really are. He has those things from you too, Vivian said. Don't sell yourself short. Miles smiled, but there was sadness in it. You know what's funny? I spent years feeling like I was failing Noah, like he deserved better than a dad who collects garbage and can barely afford to keep the lights on. I'd watch other kids with their college-educated parents, their big houses, their opportunities, and I'd think, I'm not enough. I'm never going to be enough. But you are, Vivian said fiercely. Look at him. Look at how he just gave Elsie exactly what she needed without hesitation. That doesn't come from money or education. That comes from being raised by someone who taught him that people matter more than things. Miles looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You know what I realized watching you with Elsie this past week? You're not failing either. You're learning. You're trying. That counts for a lot. I spent 3 years getting it wrong, Vivian said. 3 years pushing her toward therapists and specialists when what she needed was just... She gestured toward Elsie's room where Noah's patient voice was explaining something about computer logic while Elsie listened with rapt attention. This, connection, being seen. You're seeing her now, Miles said gently. That's what matters. They stood in the hallway listening to the kids talk, or rather Noah talk, while Elsie communicated through nods and gestures and occasional small sounds, and Vivian felt something unfamiliar settling in her chest. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of it. Miles, she said carefully, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Not polite, not careful. Honest, okay? Do you think she'll ever talk again? Really talk? Miles was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think she'll talk when she's ready, when she feels safe enough, when the words come back, when she has something she needs to say that can only be said out loud. But Vivian, he turned to face her fully. Even if she never talks again, she's still a whole person, still complete. The silence doesn't make her less. Vivian felt tears threatening again. I know that intellectually, but there's this part of me that's still waiting, still hoping for the breakthrough where everything goes back to how it was before Richard died, before the silence. And I don't know how to let go of that hope without feeling like I'm giving up on her. It's not giving up, Miles said. It's accepting. There's a difference. Noah talks now, but he's not the same kid he was before Sarah died. He's different, changed, and that's okay. He's allowed to be shaped by his grief. So is Elsie. From inside the room, they heard Elsie make a sound. Not a word, but a laugh. A small, breathy laugh in response to something Noah had said. It was the first sound of joy Vivian had heard from her daughter in 3 years. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting sobs. Miles pulled her into a gentle hug, and Vivian let herself lean into his steady warmth, let herself be held by someone who understood loss and survival and the complicated mess of trying to parent through grief. He smelled like coffee and autumn air and something indefinably safe. And Vivian thought about how strange it was that this man, this sanitation worker she'd initially dismissed as an intrusion, had become the person who made her feel less alone. Thank you, she whispered into his shoulder, for all of this. For Noah. For being patient with us. For not giving up when I was awful to you. You weren't awful, Miles said. You were scared. I understood that. They separated as Noah emerged from Elsie's room, Elsie trailing behind him with Professor Squeaks clutched alongside Mr. Buttons. So, Noah said, Elsie and I were thinking, could we maybe go to the park? She has this whole map of the playground in her room, and I want to see if the real thing matches up. The park, Vivian repeated, looking at Elsie for confirmation. Elsie nodded eagerly, already pulling on her shoes. So they went, all four of them walking the 6 blocks to Delancey Park together. Vivian and Miles fell into step side by side while the kids ranged ahead, Noah talking animatedly about his robotics project, while Elsie listened and occasionally tugged his sleeve to point at things. An interesting leaf, a painted door, a cat sunning itself on a windowsill. This is nice, Miles said. Walking, being outside. I forget sometimes to just be in the world instead of rushing through it. I never even learned, Vivian admitted. I went from college to startup to CEO without ever slowing down long enough to notice what I was missing. You're noticing now. I'm trying. At the park, Noah and Elsie claimed the swings while Miles and Vivian sat on a bench watching. The autumn sun was warm despite the October chill, and the park was alive with the sound of children playing and leaves rustling and the distant hum of city traffic. Can I ask you something personal? Vivian said after a while. Sure. After Sarah died. How did you do it? How did you keep going when everything fell apart? Miles was quiet for a long moment, watching Noah push Elsie on the swing, both kids laughing silently in the afternoon light. I didn't have a choice, he said finally. Noah needed me. And some days that was the only thing that got me out of bed. Just knowing he needed pancakes for breakfast and help with homework, and someone to tell him it was going to be okay, even when I didn't believe it myself. But you were grieving too. Yeah, I still am some days. Grief doesn't just go away, it changes, becomes part of who you are, instead of something that's happening to you. He paused. I let myself cry in front of Noah, let him see that missing Sarah was normal and okay. I think that helped both of us, knowing we could be sad together, that we didn't have to pretend to be strong all the time. Vivian thought about all the times she'd hidden her own grief from Elsie, trying to maintain composure, to be the strong parent who held everything together. Had she been teaching Elsie that sadness was shameful, that grief had to be locked away? I never cried in front of her, she said quietly. After the funeral, I mean. I thought I needed to be strong, to show her that we could survive this. But maybe I was just teaching her to hide too. You did what you thought was right, Miles said gently. That's all any of us can do. It wasn't enough. Maybe not. But you're here now. You're trying something different. That counts. They watched the kids play until the sun started to sink lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Noah taught Elsie how to pump her legs to swing higher, and Elsie showed Noah how to make leaf crowns from the fallen foliage. They were building something together, these two children shaped by loss, a friendship that understood silence and grief and the way broken things could still be beautiful. On the walk back to the mansion, Elsie took Vivian's hand on one side and Noah's on the other, forming a chain that included Miles at the end. They probably looked strange, this odd assembly of people who didn't quite match, who came from different worlds and had no obvious reason to be together. But Vivian didn't care. For the first time in 3 years, Elsie was connecting with someone new. For the first time since Richard died, Vivian felt like maybe they could survive this after all. At the mansion's gate, Noah hugged Elsie goodbye with the easy affection of someone who'd already decided they were friends. See you Saturday for coding lessons, he said. And hey, if you want to text during the week, Dad can give your mom my number. We could send pictures back and forth. You could show me your drawings. Elsie looked at Vivian hopefully. Of course, Vivian said. We'll set that up tonight. After Noah and Miles left, Vivian and Elsie sat together on the floor of Elsie's room, surrounded by drawings and stuffed animals, and the lingering warmth of a day that had felt almost normal. Did you have a good time? Vivian asked. Elsie nodded emphatically, then picked up her crayons and started a new drawing. Vivian watched as the image took shape, two children on swings holding hands across the distance between them, Above them, two figures that might have been adults or might have been ghosts, or might have been both, watching over the children with careful love. "Noah's nice, isn't he?" Vivian said. Another nod. "And Miles?" Elsie paused in her drawing, then looked at Vivian with an expression that was part question, part hope. She pointed at the adult figures in the drawing, then at Vivian, then toward the window where Miles's truck had disappeared. "You're asking if Miles and if we—" Vivian felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Sweetheart, it's not like that. We're just friends. He's helping us, that's all." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Something was growing between her and Miles, something tender and uncertain and completely terrifying. She'd spent 3 years as a widow, 3 years focused entirely on work and on Elsie's silence, 3 years believing that part of her life, the part that included connection and intimacy and the possibility of love, was over. And now here was Miles with his kind eyes and his patient wisdom and his ability to see through all her defenses to the scared, grieving woman underneath. Here was Miles making her want things she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve. Elsie was watching her with knowing eyes, and Vivian realized her daughter had always been perceptive. Even in her silence, maybe especially in her silence, Elsie saw things adults tried to hide. "Okay," Vivian admitted, "maybe I like him. Maybe he makes me feel less alone. But that doesn't mean, we're from such different worlds, and you're my priority, and I don't want to mess this up when it's finally working." Elsie reached up and put her small hand over Vivian's mouth, stopping the anxious spiral of words. Then she picked up a purple crayon and added something to her drawing, a heart, right in the center where the children's hands met. The message was clear. Love isn't something to be afraid of. Love is what holds broken things together. Vivian pulled Elsie into a hug, and this time Elsie melted into it completely, her small body relaxing into Vivian's arms like she'd finally found a safe place to land after years of floating untethered. "I love you," Vivian whispered. "So much. More than I know how to say." Elsie squeezed tighter, and though she didn't say the words back, Vivian felt them in the fierce way her daughter held on, in the trust it took to lean in instead of pull away, in the slow, steady building of a bridge between them that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. That night, after Elsie was asleep, Vivian stood at her bedroom window, looking out over Society Hill's historic streets. Her phone was in her hand, Miles's contact information glowing on the screen. She'd saved his number weeks ago, but had only ever used it for brief, practical messages about pickup times and Elsie's schedule. Now she wanted to say something else, something true. She typed and deleted 3 different messages before finally settling on something simple. "Thank you for today, for Noah, for showing us what connection looks like. You've given us more than you know." The response came quickly. "Thank you for letting us in, for trusting me with Elsie. She's special, Vivian. So are you." Vivian stared at those last 3 words until they blurred. When was the last time someone had called her special? Not brilliant or driven or successful. Those were the words people used for Vivian Sterling, CEO. But special. That was different. That was personal. That was seeing her as a person instead of a position. She typed back, "Same time next Saturday. I think Elsie would love to continue the coding lessons. Wouldn't miss it. Sleep well, Vivian." She set down her phone and returned to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Miles was probably tucking Noah into bed, having their own conversations about the day, making their own small magic in that tiny Kensington apartment. 2 households, broken by grief. 2 children learning to speak each other's language of loss. 2 parents trying to find their way through the darkness towards something that looked like healing. And between them, growing slowly but surely, the fragile beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. Hope. Connection. The possibility that broken things could be loved exactly as they were, missing pieces and all. Vivian pressed her hand against the window glass, feeling the cold bite of autumn night. Tomorrow she had board meetings and investor calls and a dozen fires to put out. Tomorrow she'd have to face Thomas Brennan's continued skepticism and the market's response to her Family First declaration. But tonight, Elsie was sleeping peacefully with Professor Squeaks and Mr. Buttons tucked close. Tito. Tonight, Noah's patient kindness had given her daughter the first real friendship she'd had in years. Tonight, Miles had shown Vivian that strength could be soft, that wisdom could come in work boots, that the help she needed had been there all along. She'd just been too proud to see it. Tomorrow could bring whatever it wanted. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Vivian Sterling went to bed feeling like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. The Saturday coding lessons became a ritual that neither household wanted to break. Every weekend, Miles and Noah would arrive at the mansion around 10 in the morning, Miles carrying coffee for himself and Vivian, while Noah brought his laptop and an endless supply of patience for teaching Elsie the logic of programming. They'd spread out in the kitchen. Vivian had decided she liked her kitchen being used, liked the smell of coffee and the sound of Noah's explanations mixing with the autumn light streaming through the windows, and work for hours on simple games and animations that made Elsie's eyes light up with understanding. But it wasn't just about coding. Between lessons, they'd take breaks to walk in the park or make lunch together, or simply sit in comfortable silence while Elsie drew and Noah worked on his Science Olympiad project. Vivian and Miles would talk, really talk, about everything and nothing, about grief and parenting and the strange paths life took, when you stop trying to control every outcome. 3 weeks into this new pattern, Vivian came home from work early to find something that made her freeze in the kitchen doorway. Elsie was standing at the stove with Miles, both of them wearing aprons, and Elsie was making noise. Not words exactly, but humming, a soft, tuneless melody, while she stirred something in a pot under Miles's careful supervision. Noah sat at the island doing homework, occasionally looking up to offer commentary on whatever they were cooking, and the whole scene was so domestic, so utterly normal, that Vivian felt her throat close with emotion. Miles noticed her first. "Hey, you're home early. We're making soup." "Well, Elsie's making soup. I'm just here for safety supervision and moral support." Elsie turned at the sound of Vivian's voice, and her face broke into a smile. A real, full smile that crinkled her eyes and showed teeth. She waved the wooden spoon in greeting, sending droplets of tomato soup flying, and kept humming. "She's been humming for about 20 minutes, Noah said casually, not making a big deal of it. "Started when we were chopping vegetables. I think she likes cooking." Vivian set down her briefcase with hands that shook slightly. Humming. Her daughter was humming, making sound by choice, filling the silence with melody, existing out loud in a way she hadn't in 3 years. "It smells wonderful," Vivian managed to say, her voice only slightly unsteady. "What kind of soup?" "Tomato basil," Miles said. "Elsie picked the recipe, found it in one of your cookbooks and pointed at it very insistently." "That was Richard's favorite," Vivian said quietly. "He used to make it every fall." Elsie stopped stirring for a moment, her humming fading. She looked at Vivian with those storm cloud eyes, and Vivian saw the question in them. Is it okay to remember him this way? Is it okay to bring him back through recipes and rituals? "I think he'd love that you're making it," Vivian said gently. "I think he'd be so proud of you, sweetheart." Elsie's humming resumed, softer now, but steadier. She turned back to the stove, and Miles caught Vivian's eye over her daughter's head. The look he gave her was full of understanding and pride and something else, something warmer that made Vivian's heart skip in a way she'd forgotten hearts could skip. They ate the soup together at the kitchen island, all 4 of them crowded around the counter with mismatched bowls because Vivian had never bothered to figure out where Mrs. Chen kept the matching sets. It was possibly the best tomato soup Vivian had ever tasted, or maybe it just tasted like hope and healing and the slow knitting together of broken things. "This is restaurant quality," Noah declared. "Seriously, Elsie, you could sell this." Elsie beamed and hummed a little louder. After dinner, while Noah and Elsie were absorbed in building a new animation on the laptop, Miles and Vivian found themselves alone in the mansion's library, a room Vivian rarely used despite its floor-to-ceiling shelves and comfortable leather chairs. Miles was examining the books with the careful appreciation of someone who loved reading but didn't often have time for it. "Sarah would have loved this room," he said, running his fingers along the spines. "She was always dragging me to used bookstores, coming home with bags full of paperbacks we had no space for." "What was she like?" Vivian asked. She'd been wanting to ask for weeks but hadn't known how. Miles smiled, sad and fond at once. "She was light. That sounds corny, but it's true. She could walk into a room and make it brighter just by being there. Laughed at everything, good jokes, bad jokes, things that weren't even meant to be funny. She made me better, made me braver. How did you meet? Community college. I was taking night classes, trying to get an associate's degree while working full-time. Sarah was studying to be a teacher. We got paired for a group project, and He laughed softly. She decided I was worth knowing. Didn't care that I came from nothing, that I had no prospects, that I was barely keeping my head above water. She saw something in me I didn't see in myself. Vivian felt her chest tighten. That's beautiful. It was, right up until the day it wasn't. Miles turned to face her fully. I'm not going to lie to you, Vivian. Some days I'm still angry at her for leaving, for dying on a random Tuesday when we were supposed to have 40 more years, for making me do this alone. I know that anger, Vivian said quietly. I spent the first year after Richard died furious at him, for smoking in college even though he quit, for not catching the cancer sooner, for leaving me alone with a traumatized 3-year-old and a company to run and no idea how to do either one without him. They stood in the library surrounded by books. Neither of them was reading, two people who'd loved deeply and lost completely, trying to figure out if they were allowed to want something new. Can I tell you what scares me? Vivian asked. Please. This, us, whatever this is becoming, she gestured between them. I'm terrified of messing it up, of letting Elsie get attached and then having it fall apart, of opening myself up to loss again when I barely survived it the first time. Miles moved closer, close enough that Vivian could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell coffee and autumn air, and something uniquely him. I'm scared too, he said. I'm scared that you'll wake up one day and realize you're a billionaire CEO and I'm a garbage man and this doesn't make sense. I'm scared that Noah will get hurt. I'm scared that I'm not enough, not educated enough, not wealthy enough, not whatever enough for someone like you. Someone like me? Vivian's voice came out sharper than she intended. Miles, I'm a mess. I'm a woman who was so focused on controlling everything that I nearly lost my daughter, who needed a sanitation worker to teach me how to be present, who's still figuring out how to be a human being instead of just a CEO. You're also brilliant and brave and doing your best, Miles said. You're learning. You're trying. That counts. So are you. And for the record, Vivian took a breath, gathering courage. You're more than enough. You're patient and kind and wise in ways that have nothing to do with degrees or bank accounts. You've given Elsie something I couldn't buy with all my money. You've given her hope. You've given me hope. Miles reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers gentle against her skin. So what do we do about this? About us? I don't know, Vivian admitted. I don't have a plan. I don't have a strategy. I just know that when you're here, everything feels less impossible. And when you leave, I count the hours until I see you again. That's a good start, Miles said softly. And then, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative and perfect, the kiss of two people who'd forgotten how to do this, who were rusty with grief and caution, but willing to try anyway. Vivian's hats found the front of his shirt, holding on while the world tilted and righted itself into a new configuration. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Miles rested his forehead against hers. I have to tell you something, he said. Before this goes any further, I can't give you the life Richard did. I can't give you mansions and drivers and vacations in Europe. I work with my hands, and I'll probably always work with my hands. My apartment is tiny and my truck is old, and I buy my clothes at Target. Miles, let me finish. I need you to know what you're getting into. I need you to be sure that I'm enough. Vivian pulled back to look him in the eye. Do you know what Richard gave me that I actually valued? Not the money or the house or any of the material things. He gave me presence. He gave me someone who saw me as a person instead of a position. He gave me partnership. She cupped Miles's face in her hands. You've given me all of that in a few weeks. You've shown up consistently for my daughter when I'd given up hope. You've taught me that wisdom doesn't come from boardrooms. So yes, Miles Carter, you're enough. More than enough. This time when they kissed, it was less tentative, more certain. A promise being made without words, two broken people choosing to build something new from the pieces they had left. They broke apart at the sound of footsteps, turning to find Noah and Elsie standing in the library doorway. Noah looked pleased and entirely unsurprised. Elsie's eyes were wide, but she was smiling, and in her hand she held a drawing she must have just completed, two figures holding hands surrounded by hearts. "So," Noah said, grinning, "I'm guessing this means we're doing Thanksgiving together?" Vivian laughed, surprising herself. "Is that what you want, Elsie?" Elsie nodded emphatically and held up her drawing like evidence. "Then Thanksgiving together it is," Miles said. "Though I should warn you, I make a mean sweet potato pie, but my turkey skills are questionable." "I'll handle the turkey," Vivian said. "Or more accurately, I'll hire someone to handle the turkey." "No," Miles said firmly but kindly. "We'll make the turkey together, all four of us. That's the whole point." And so they did. Over the next few weeks, as November arrived with cold rain and early darkness, the four of them planned a Thanksgiving that would be nothing like the catered, perfect affairs Vivian used to host. There would be no hired staff, no matching china, no photographers to document the Sterling family's elegant holiday celebration. Instead, there would be chaos and laughter and a turkey that Miles and Noah would teach Vivian and Elsie how to prepare from scratch. There would be mismatched chairs around the dining room table and store-bought pie alongside homemade stuffing and probably at least one small kitchen disaster that would become a story they'd tell for years. But first, they had to navigate the increasingly complex reality of their merging lives. The board meeting in mid-November was particularly brutal. Thomas Brennan had clearly been waiting for the right moment to strike, and he chose the quarterly review to make his move. "The Singapore merger is complete," he acknowledged. "Congratulations, Vivian. But we need to discuss the long-term implications of your recent choices. The company's image has taken a hit. Stock prices are down 3%. Investors are concerned about your priorities." "My priorities," Vivian said evenly, "are exactly where they should be. I'm running this company effectively while also being present for my daughter. Those aren't mutually exclusive." "Aren't they?" Brennan pulled up a photo on the conference room screen. Vivian and Miles walking in the park with the kids, clearly taken by a telephoto lens. "This has been circulating on social media. The CEO of Sterling Technologies romantically involved with a sanitation worker. The optics are problematic." Vivian felt rage rising hot and fast. "What's problematic is that you think my personal life is your business. What's problematic is that you're more concerned about optics than humanity. What's problematic is that you can't seem to understand that people matter more than stock prices." "People don't pay dividends, Vivian." "No, but they build companies worth investing in." Vivian stood, gathering her materials. "I'm giving you a choice, Thomas. You can accept that I'm going to live my life with integrity and authenticity, relationship and all. Or you can call for a vote of no confidence and see how the other board members feel about replacing the CEO, who just closed an $800 million merger." "You're betting a lot on their loyalty," Brennan said. "I'm betting on their intelligence," Vivian corrected. "Sterling Technologies is worth $3 billion because of my vision and leadership. I'm not going to apologize for also being a human being with a family and a personal life, so vote if you want to. But I'm done defending my humanity to people who've forgotten their own." She walked out before he could respond, her heart hammering but her head high. Marcus Wu caught up with her in the hallway. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Vivian admitted. "For what it's worth," Marcus said quietly, "I think you're doing the right thing. My kids barely know me. I've missed every important moment of their childhood for board meetings and investor calls. Sometimes I wonder what I'm building all this for if I'm losing everything that matters." Vivian looked at him with new understanding. "It's not too late, Marcus. It's never too late to choose differently. Maybe not for you, but some of us have been choosing wrong for too long." He walked away, and Vivian felt the weight of his words. How many people were trapped in lives they'd built but didn't want? How many had sacrificed connection for achievement and woken up to find themselves successful and desperately lonely? She'd been heading down that same path before Miles appeared at her gate with a battered teddy bear and showed her a different way. That evening, she came home to find Miles teaching Elsie how to make pancakes, their special Wednesday tradition, he explained, but he thought Elsie might enjoy learning. The kitchen was a disaster of flour and eggshells and laughter, and Vivian stood in the doorway watching her daughter flip pancakes with intense concentration while Miles offered gentle encouragement. "A little higher," he was saying. "Give it some air. That's it. Perfect flip." Elsie's pancake soared and landed with a splat that sent flour puffing into the air. She clapped her hands over her mouth, eyes wide, and then impossibly, miraculously, she laughed, out loud. An actual laugh, breathy and small, but unmistakably real. Miles froze, the spatula halfway to the griddle. Elsie's hands were still over her mouth, her eyes shocked at the sound she'd just made. "That was wonderful," Miles said carefully, not making too big a deal of it. "You've got a great laugh, kiddo. Let's hear it again." But Elsie had retreated into silence, the moment passing as quickly as it had come. Still, she was smiling behind her hands, and when she lowered them, her expression was one of wonder rather than fear. "Progress," Miles said softly to Vivian. "It's all progress." 2 weeks later, the night before Thanksgiving, Elsie had her first setback. Vivian found her in her bedroom after dinner, curled into a ball on the floor, rocking slightly and clutching Mr. Button so hard her knuckles were white. The drawings around her were dark, all black and gray, showing figures turned away from each other, gates locked tight, hearts breaking apart. "Elsie, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Vivian sat down beside her daughter, not touching, but close. "Talk to me or show me, however you need to communicate." Elsie shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. Vivian's phone buzzed, Miles checking in before bed like he did every night now. She answered, keeping her voice low. "Something's wrong with Elsie. She's having a hard time, and I don't know what triggered it." "I'll be right there," Miles said immediately. "Miles, it's late. You don't have to." "I'll be right there." He arrived 20 minutes later with Noah, both of them still in their pajamas with coats thrown over. They came up to Elsie's room where Vivian was sitting helplessly while her daughter cried silent, devastating tears. Noah understood immediately. He sat down on Elsie's other side and said quietly, "Bad grief day?" Elsie nodded, not looking up. "I get those," Noah said. "Days where everything feels wrong and you miss your person so much it's like they died all over again. Days where you're angry at everyone for being alive when they're not." Elsie's rocking slowed slightly. "I had one last week," Noah continued. "It was my mom's birthday. And I was doing okay, until I wasn't. Until I saw this woman at the grocery store who laughed just like Mom used to, and suddenly I was 7 years old again, and the grief was eating me alive." Elsie finally looked up at him, her face wet with tears. "It's okay to still be sad," Noah said. "It's okay to have days where the progress doesn't matter, and you just miss your dad. That doesn't mean you're going backwards. It just means you loved him, and love doesn't go away just because people do." Elsie reached for Noah's hand, and he took it, both of them sitting in the quiet understanding of shared loss. Miles moved closer to Vivian, his hand finding the small of her back. "This is normal," he murmured. "Healing isn't linear. She's going to have hard days." "I know," Vivian whispered, "but it still breaks my heart." "Mine too. But look," he nodded toward the kids. "She's not alone in it anymore. That's what matters." After a while, Elsie's tears slowed. She showed Noah the dark drawings, pointing at different elements and using gestures to explain what Vivian couldn't decipher. But Noah seemed to understand. "You're scared," he said. "Scared that if you're happy again, it means you're forgetting your dad. Scared that moving forward is being disloyal to him." Elsie nodded miserably. "I used to think that too," Noah said. "But Dad helped me understand something. He said Mom didn't die so I could be sad forever. She died, which sucks, but she'd want me to live, to be happy, to find good things even in a world without her." He paused. "Your dad would want that for you too, Elsie. He'd want you to laugh and learn to code and make terrible pancakes with us. He'd want you to be whole, even if that wholeness looks different than before." Elsie looked at Vivian as if seeking confirmation. "Noah's right," Vivian said, her voice thick with tears. "Your dad loved you more than anything in the world. The last thing he'd want is for his death to steal your joy forever. He'd want you to remember him, yes, to miss him, absolutely, but also to live, to really, fully live." Elsie pulled one more drawing from her pile. an older one, crumpled and re-smoothed many times. It showed Richard, young and healthy, pushing a small Elsie on a swing. Both figures were laughing, frozen in a moment of pure happiness. At the bottom, in careful letters, Elsie had written, "Daddy says fly." "He used to say that," Vivian breathed, "when he pushed you on the swings. Fly, little bird, fly high." Elsie pressed the drawing to her chest, fresh tears falling, but these tears felt different. Cleansing rather than devastating, releasing rather than holding on. "He'd be so proud of you," Vivian said, "of how brave you've been, of how you're learning to fly again." Elsie crawled into Vivian's lap, something she hadn't done in years, and Vivian held her while she cried. Miles and Noah sat with them in the quiet solidarity of people who understood that some pain needed to be witnessed, not fixed. Eventually, Elsie's tears subsided. She lifted her head from Vivian's shoulder and looked at Noah, then at Miles. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was trying to speak, Vivian realized, trying to push past 3 years of silence to say something that mattered. "Thank you," Elsie whispered. The words were barely audible, rusty with disuse, but they were words. Real, spoken words. Noah's eyes went wide. Miles's hand found Vivian's and squeezed tight, and Vivian felt tears streaming down her own face as she held her daughter close. "You're welcome, sweetheart," Miles said gently. "You're so welcome." Elsie didn't say anything else that night, retreating back into her comfortable silence. But the wall had cracked. The possibility had emerged. She could speak when she needed to, when the words were important enough to fight for. Thanksgiving morning arrived bright and cold, the kind of November day that promised winter was coming but hadn't quite arrived. Miles and Noah showed up at 8 with grocery bags full of ingredients and recipes printed from the internet, ready to tackle a turkey neither Miles nor Vivian had ever successfully cooked before. The kitchen descended into beautiful chaos. Miles coached Elsie through chopping vegetables while Noah and Vivian wrestled with the turkey, both of them consulting YouTube videos and arguing good-naturedly about the right way to season it. Flour ended up everywhere. The cranberry sauce boiled over. At one point, the smoke alarm went off from a forgotten dinner roll that had turned into charcoal. But through it all, there was laughter. Real, genuine laughter that filled the mansion's usually silent halls and made it feel like a home instead of a museum. Elsie hummed while she stirred, occasionally making small sounds of concentration or pleasure. Noah narrated everything like a cooking show host, making Vivian laugh so hard she cried. And Miles moved through the kitchen with quiet confidence, his presence steadying everyone else's chaos, his patience infinite when things went wrong. He'd catch Vivian's eye across the counter and smile, and she'd feel her heart do that skip thing again, that sense of rightness she'd thought she'd never feel again after Richard. By mid-afternoon, they had something that resembled a feast spread across the dining room table. The turkey was possibly overcooked, but looked impressive. The sweet potato pie Miles had made smelled like autumn and sugar and love. Elsie's vegetable medley was perfectly seasoned, and Noah's attempt at homemade biscuits was only slightly lopsided. They sat down together, this cobbled-together family of 4 who'd found each other in the wreckage of grief, and Vivian felt something shift in her chest. This was what she'd been missing, not perfection, but presence. Not control, but connection. "Should we do the thing where we say what we're thankful for?" Noah asked. "I know it's corny, but I think it's perfect," Vivian said. "Who wants to start?" "I'll go," Noah offered. "I'm thankful for Elsie, who's teaching me that you don't need words to communicate important things. I'm thankful for this turkey that we definitely didn't ruin. And I'm thankful that my dad found people who make him smile again." Miles reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder, pride and love clear on his face. "I'm thankful for second chances," Miles said. "For a little girl who reminded me why kindness matters. For a woman who's brave enough to rebuild her life even when it's terrifying. And for this moment, right here, which is more than I thought I'd ever have again." He looked at Vivian, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm thankful for all of you," Vivian said quietly. "For teaching me that strength isn't about control, it's about showing up honestly even when you're scared. For showing me that family isn't just about blood, it's about choosing each other every day. For reminding me that it's okay to be human instead of perfect." They all turned to Elsie, who was holding Mr. Buttons in one hand and Professor Squeaks in the other. She looked at each of them in turn, her gray eyes serious and thoughtful. Then she took a deep breath, gathering courage, and spoke. "I'm thankful," she said, her voice soft but clear, each word deliberate and precious, "for people who see me, for Noah teaching me coding, for Miles fixing my bear, for Mommy learning to listen." She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. "And for Daddy, who I miss every day, but who would want me to be happy. Who would want me to fly?" Vivian was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. Miles had his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes wet. Noah was grinning through his tears, and Elsie looked lighter somehow, like speaking had released some weight she'd been carrying for too long. "That was beautiful, sweetheart," Vivian managed. "So beautiful." Elsie nodded, then pointed at the food with a small smile, clearly ready to move past the emotional moment. They passed dishes and filled plates, and the conversation shifted to lighter things. Noah's upcoming Science Olympiad competition, Miles's plan to take a few days off work, Vivian's decision to step back from some board responsibilities to focus on work-life balance. Halfway through dinner, Elsie tugged on Vivian's sleeve. When Vivian leaned down, Elsie whispered, "Can Miles and Noah come live here? There's so many empty rooms." The question was so unexpected, so achingly hopeful, that Vivian almost laughed. But she also saw the fear underneath, Elsie's worry that this new family would dissolve, that people would leave like her father had left, that happiness was temporary and couldn't be trusted. "That's a big decision," Vivian said carefully. "Not something we can decide today. But Elsie," she made sure her daughter was looking at her. "Miles and Noah aren't going anywhere. Whether they live here or in their apartment, they're part of our family now. That doesn't change." "Promise?" Elsie whispered. "I promise," Vivian said. Then, looking at Miles, "We all promise." Miles nodded, understanding the weight of that commitment. "Every Thursday and every Saturday, minimum. Plus, Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthdays and any random Tuesday when you want to see us. We're here, Elsie. We're not leaving." Elsie relaxed back into her chair, satisfied. After dinner, they played board games in the library, ridiculous games that Noah had brought where the rules made no sense and everyone cheated outrageously, and the point was laughter rather than winning. Elsie spoke occasionally, small comments or single words, and nobody made a big deal of it. They just responded naturally, creating space for her voice when she wanted to use it and respecting her silence when she didn't. As the evening wound down and Noah started to doze on the leather couch, Miles found Vivian alone in the kitchen, putting away leftovers. "Thank you for today," he said quietly. "For including us. For making this feel like family." "Thank you for existing," Vivian said. "For showing up at my gate with a teddy bear and changing everything." Miles pulled her close, and they stood in the kitchen holding each other while the dishwasher hummed and the house settled around them. "I don't know what the future looks like," Vivian admitted. "I don't know how to make this work long term. The class differences, the public scrutiny, the logistics of merging our lives. But I know I want to try. I know that what we're building here matters more than anything else." "We'll figure it out," Miles said. "One day at a time. One Thursday at a time. However long it takes." "The board might force me out," Vivian warned. "There's a vote coming after the first of the year. If they decide I'm too distracted, too controversial, I could lose the company I built." "Then you'll build something else," Miles said simply. "You're brilliant and driven and capable of anything you set your mind to. Sterling Technologies isn't your only value, Vivian. It's not even your most important one." She pulled back to look at him. "How did you get so wise?" "Survival, loss, learning the hard way what actually matters when everything else gets stripped away." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Vivian Sterling. I love your messy kitchen and your terrible turkey and the way you're learning to be human instead of perfect. I love who you are when you stop trying to control everything, and I'm going to keep loving you whether you're a CEO or not, whether you live in a mansion or a tiny apartment, whether the world approves or not." "I love you too," Vivian whispered. "So much it terrifies me." They kissed in the warm kitchen surrounded by the debris of their shared meal, two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, building a family from the pieces grief had left behind. In the library, Elsie woke from where she'd fallen asleep next to Noah on the couch. She padded to the kitchen doorway and stopped, watching her mother kiss Miles with a small smile on her face. She didn't interrupt. She just pulled out the small notebook she'd started carrying everywhere and drew another picture. The gate standing open, 4 figures holding hands in a circle, hearts floating above them like balloons. At the bottom, in letters that were getting steadier with practice, she wrote 3 words: "My new family." The vote came in January, just as Vivian had predicted. Thomas Brennan called for a formal review of her leadership, citing concerns about her focus, her priorities, her relationship with Miles, her unconventional approach to work-life balance. Vivian stood before the board in her corner office, Elsie's latest drawing in her briefcase for courage, and made her case. "I'm not going to defend my humanity to you," she said calmly. "I'm not going to apologize for choosing my daughter, for building a family, for learning that there's more to life than quarterly earnings. What I will say is this: Sterling Technologies is stronger than it's ever been. We closed the Singapore merger. We've expanded into 3 new markets. Our product development is ahead of schedule, and our employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high because I instituted better work-life balance policies across the company." "That's not the point," Brennan started. "That's exactly the point," Vivian cut him off. "I've proven you can be excellent at your job and present in your life. I've proven that family and success aren't mutually exclusive. And if you can't see that, if you'd rather have a CEO who sacrifices everything for this company, then maybe it's time for me to step down." The room went silent. "But know this," Vivian continued, her voice steady and clear. "I built this company from nothing. Every innovation, every major decision, every risk that paid off, that was me. And I'm not ashamed of also being a mother who's present for her daughter. I'm not ashamed of loving a good man who treats my child with kindness. I'm not ashamed of being human." She gathered her things. "So vote. But if you vote me out, you're not just losing a CEO. You're losing someone who believed this company could be profitable and humane, successful and ethical, innovative and compassionate. That's my legacy. Take it or leave it." She walked out with her head high, and this time she didn't wait to hear the result. She went home to the mansion where Miles was teaching Elsie more advanced coding while Noah worked on a robotics presentation. She walked into her kitchen, her warm, lived-in, imperfect kitchen, and Miles looked up with a question in his eyes. "I told them the truth," Vivian said, "and now whatever happens, happens." "Proud of you," Miles said simply. The call came 3 hours later. Marcus Wu's voice was warm when Vivian answered. "You still have a job," he said. 7-1 vote in your favor. Brennan's resigned from the board effective immediately. Turns out the other members agreed that humanity is actually good for business. Vivian sank into a chair, dizzy with relief. 7-1? You built something worth fighting for, Vivian. Not just the company, the culture, the belief that people can be whole. We don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose you. After she hung up, she found Elsie watching her from the doorway. Her daughter came closer and climbed into Vivian's lap, something she did regularly now, and said softly, "You didn't have to choose." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Between the company and me, you got to keep both, because you chose right." Vivian held her daughter close, marveling at her wisdom. "You're absolutely right. I did choose right." That spring, Miles and Noah moved into the mansion, not because they had to, but because it made sense. 3 of the 4 bedrooms were sitting empty. Elsie spent every weekend begging for them to stay, and the commute from Kensington was eating into time they could spend together. Miles resisted at first, proud and uncomfortable with accepting what felt like charity, but Vivian wore him down with logic. "It's not about money," she'd argued. "It's about building something together, about giving the kids stability, about creating a home instead of maintaining a museum." "What will people say?" Miles had worried. "I've stopped caring what people say. Have you?" So they moved in. Miles and Noah with their modest possessions, their secondhand furniture, their books and plants, and the lived-in warmth they carried everywhere. The mansion transformed, room by room, from a sterile showcase into an actual home. Noah's robotics projects sprawled across the library. Miles's plants lined every windowsill. The kitchen always smelled like something cooking, and there was always noise, conversation and laughter and music and life. Elsie bloomed in this new environment. She still didn't talk constantly, still chose silence more often than speech, but her words came more easily now. Good morning, and I love you, and can you help me with this? Threaded through her days like pearls on a string. She and Noah were inseparable, working on coding projects and science experiments and elaborate games that only they understood. And Vivian learned to leave work at work, to come home at 5, to have dinner with her family every night. She learned to cook, badly at first, and then with growing competence under Miles's patient instruction. She learned to play, to be silly, to let go of control and trust that the world would keep turning even when she wasn't managing every detail. She learned to be happy. One evening in June, almost 8 months after Miles had first returned Mister Buttons to a silent 6-year-old girl, the 4 of them sat in the backyard, a space Vivian had never used before, but that Miles had transformed into a garden full of vegetables and flowers and possibility. Elsie and Noah were catching fireflies in the gathering dusk, while Vivian and Miles sat on a blanket watching. "I've been thinking," Miles said carefully, "about asking you something, but I don't want you to feel pressured, and I know it's complicated with the kids and the public attention and—" "Miles," Vivian interrupted, smiling, "just ask." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Vivian's heart stopped. It wasn't a fancy jewelry box. It was wooden and handmade, simple and beautiful. "I know we've only been together for 8 months, Miles said. "I know people will say it's too fast, that we're from different worlds, that it won't work. But Vivian, I also know that I want to spend every day of the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up to you making terrible coffee and go to sleep with you, stealing all the blankets. I want to raise these kids together and build a life that's messy and imperfect and real." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not a diamond, but a simple band with a small stone that caught the fading light. "It's opal," Miles explained. "Richard's birthstone. I wanted him to be part of this somehow, to know that I'm not trying to replace him, just carry forward what he started. Love you and Elsie the way he would have wanted." Vivian was crying, her hands shaking as she reached for the ring. "It's perfect. You're perfect. And yes, Miles Carter. Yes to all of it. Yes to messy and imperfect and real. Yes to building a life together. Yes to forever." He slipped the ring on her finger and they kissed while fireflies danced around them, and somewhere in the garden their children whooped with joy. "Finally!" Noah shouted. "Elsie, your mom said yes." "I heard," Elsie called back, her voice carrying clear and strong through the summer evening. "I told you she would." The kids ran over, crashing into the blanket and demanding to see the ring and talking over each other about wedding plans and whether they'd get to wear fancy clothes and could there please be cake. Vivian and Miles laughed and held their children close, this family they'd built from broken pieces, and Vivian thought about how strange life was. A year ago, she'd been drowning in grief and silence, losing her daughter inch by inch, failing at everything that mattered. A year ago, she'd thought happiness was something that had died with Richard, that joy was a memory instead of a possibility. And then a garbage truck had rumbled down her street, and a kind man had noticed a sad girl in a window, and everything had changed, not all at once, not perfectly, but truly, deeply, permanently. "What are you thinking?" Miles asked softly, reading her expression. "That I'm grateful," Vivian said. "For second chances. For broken teddy bears and Thursday mornings, and the courage to let someone in. For you teaching me that the help I needed was never going to come from specialists or money or control. It came from showing up, from being present, from love." "We taught each other," Miles said. "You showed me that I was enough, that my love and presence had value even without a fancy degree or a big bank account. We healed each other, Vivian, all 4 of us." Elsie climbed into Vivian's lap while Noah settled against Miles's shoulder, and they sat together in the garden watching night fall over Philadelphia. The mansion rose behind them, no longer a fortress but a home. The gate stood open, unlocked, welcoming. Inside, Mr. Buttons sat on Elsie's windowsill next to Professor Squeaks, both stuffed animals watching over the family they'd helped build. The missing button eye and the worn fur were badges of honor now, proof that broken things were worth loving, that imperfection was its own kind of perfect. Tell me the story again, Elsie said suddenly, her voice soft but certain. About how you and Miles met. You know that story, Vivian said, smiling. You were there. I know, but I like hearing it. I like remembering how the gate opened. So Vivian told the story. How a teddy bear ended up in the trash, how Miles had seen a girl in a window and recognized her grief, how small acts of kindness had cracked open walls that seemed impenetrable. She told it with Miles adding details, Noah interjecting commentary, all of them building the narrative together the way they built everything now, collaboratively, imperfectly, with love. When the story ended, Elsie said quietly, I think Daddy would like Miles. I think he'd be happy we found each other. I think you're right, Vivian said, her voice thick with tears. I think he's probably been watching over us this whole time, making sure we'd be okay. He sent Miles, Elsie said, with the certainty of a child who understood things adults tried to logic away. He knew we needed him. Maybe she was right, or maybe it was just chance. A garbage route that happened to include Locust Street, a bear that happened to fall from a split bag, a man who happened to be kind enough to notice a child's grief. Maybe it was fate or coincidence or something in between. But sitting in the garden with her family gathered close, Vivian chose to believe in the version where love persisted beyond death, where the people we lost helped guide us toward the people we needed, where broken things found each other and built something whole. She chose to believe that gates could open, that silence could break into song, that endings could become beginnings. She chose to believe in second chances, in chosen family, in the radical courage it took to love again after loss. And as the stars came out over Philadelphia, and the children's laughter mixed with the evening birdsong, and Miles's hand found hers in the darkness, Vivian Sterling, no longer just a CEO, but a mother, a partner, a person learning to be beautifully, messily human, believed in hope. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.